All right, seventh year over Rev fans, have we got yet another amazing show for you today? Our guest today on the show he's become a good friend of mine. He's an automotive and racing professional. He's been in the industry for over 20 years. He's driven and competed at the highest of highs and the lowest of lows in different various series. He's an accomplished speaker, accomplished author, which we're going to talk about here during the course of this episode. He's a presenter. He's a really amazing communicator. He and I have had numerous discussions about driving theory and how to communicate with people and how to get them kind of to dial in and be able to get through and communicate the things that we're passionate about in a way that they can understand. So I very much appreciate this guy's style. But what you guys probably know him most well about, and by the way, before we even get to that, when I say he's driven damn near everything, I mean, he's driven literally damn near everything, including like 1,000 horsepower Pikes Peak hill climb car, which he'll talk about here in a moment. But to the point, you probably know him best. Actually, you don't know him best because you probably didn't know who he was. But if you're familiar at all with the Top Gear TV series, particularly the Top Gear USA show, this man played the Stig. Yes, that guy, the Stig, for 7 seasons on the Top Gear USA. So without further ado, John and I would like to welcome our new friend of the show, the Stig, Mr. Paul Gerard. Paul, welcome to Seventh Year Overhead, my friend. How are you?
I'm great. Boy, with that intro, hold on. I need to take a breath here. Actually, you need to take a breath, Kevin.
The list of accomplishments of yours are exhausting, my friend. I could probably spend another 20 minutes just going through your highlight reel here. But thank you for coming on the show today, man. We're so glad to have you. How you been?
I've been really well. It's great to get the opportunity to come on and chat with you guys. And it's always so cool to get an opportunity to talk with like-minded people about topics that are just so near and dear to all our hearts, so it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for giving me the chance.
Absolutely. And, I kind of glossed over the whole idea of you being an accomplished author, but you wrote a pretty amazing book that when I heard about it, as a driver, as a driving coach myself, like you, Paul, I get kind of geeked out about trying to learn different things that I can use, and see how other people are communicating similar thoughts. And you wrote this amazing book called Optimum Drive, which we'll get into more in a little bit, but that is a very unique perspective on not just how to be a better driver in a way that people can understand it, but it also applies to kind of everything else in life, how to not just be a great driver, but how to be a better person as well. And that's one of the unique facets of that book that I really appreciated, that it's not just, geek speak, for people that aren't going to get it and their heads are going to explode, but they can actually digest this and it makes sense. So we will get to that here shortly, but we want to know a little bit more of the story of how the Stig got this whole thing started. Cause you've been literally everywhere, man. You were out at Sonoma for a long time with the Audi guys. You've been teaching, you've been racing. Where did it all begin, man? Let's set the table here.
Yeah, it's a weird journey. I think anyone that's in this industry that kind of ends up being a professional in the industry, like that's what you make your living at. I think everyone has like some sort of crazy story about their journey, because there's just no set path. And I think maybe most importantly, like there's no intention.
That's right.
I think that's truly, it's like some master plan. And you're like, no, we're a bunch of lazy race car drivers. Like that's basically it. We're just trying to stay relevant and trying to stay in race cars and thinking of anything we can do to have an excuse to be at the track, because we have no money. So we have to have like some way of someone paying our way to get to a racetrack. So it's like a whole life of that.
Right. Well, it's like, my standing joke, when we get people, because, whether it's an AMG Mercedes program or any other manufacturer program, they're like, oh, the participants are like, oh, you have the coolest job. How did you get this job? And I say, well, it was a series of poor career choices.
Yeah. What's that book series? A series of unfortunate events.
Yeah. When we talked to,
and sometimes they're fortunate. They just don't seem fortunate at the time. It ends up being like serendipity or something.
When we talked to David
Jones, it's like
Jones,
a bunch of bad decisions. No, or let's say let's say it's a bunch of what you think will be the most fun decision, and that's not necessarily like monetarily the smart decision. You're just like, I just want to do that, and so it is like that. Like none of us went to business school, obviously.
It's funny you say that, because when we spoke to Davy Jones here a couple of weeks ago, I asked him, was like, was the initial plan to talk to, when he was talking to McLaren and, trying to get into Formula One, I was like, was that the initial plan? He said, no. He goes, just got there. It just sort of happened.
Yeah. Someone shoves you in front. It's like you see like, you see in like a movie where someone's like standing on the side stage, and they really know how to sing. And, they're trying to like coax them to come on the stage, and no one will, and they won't do it themselves. And someone just literally just shoves them onto the stage, and they're just like, all right, I guess I'm singing. It's like that, we're like,
starts out as being the reluctant participant.
Yeah. You're just like, and then someone puts the spotlight on you, and you either perform or you don't. And usually the person that puts the spotlight on you knows that you can perform, or they wouldn't have put you in that situation in the first place. So it's your own, you're kind of being your own worst enemy. And then you sort of discover after the fact, like, well, I guess I can do it. And that describes a lot of races that I did where I went in thinking this was going to be horrible. And it ends up being a really good result. You're just like, okay, and now you have that little bit of confidence you take to the next level. But it's man, oh man, it's like, fits and starts this career. It goes, it stops, it goes, it stops. And that's where, when I have this resume that is all over the map, and it is. I mean, it's almost in a way, it's both humbling and embarrassing at the same time. Like all the things that I do, right? On some level, I'm like embarrassed by. I literally would like to just be a race car driver. Like, I'd like to just be Davy Jones, and like, hey, tell us about when you won the GTP championship and the Jags, and F3 with Senna and Martin Brundle, and all of that. Like that's what I want to talk about, or what that is not my career. And again, in a way, sort of embarrassingly, that's not my career. I did do a lot of racing. I still do a reasonable amount of racing. I've had good success with racing, but it hasn't been continual. And so the norm in the industry is you find other ways to be at the racetrack, like I was saying a few moments ago. And that involved, like 1991, fresh back from Europe, running Formula cars over there, winning a scholarship with Winfield and doing all that stuff. And then, running into a stalled economy, basically, where there just wasn't money for racing, especially for an American over there at the time. And I didn't have any personal money to throw in the pot. Coming back here and then, doing some Skip Barber Formula Ford races, because I'm like, well, I just want to be racing. And then meeting Simon Kirkby, who was the vice president of Skip Barber, and he hearing me talk in the paddock to other drivers. I wasn't an instructor, but I was instructing them. And he's like, who's this guy? We got Pete Argentiner, we got Walt Boren, we've got Bruce McQuiston, we've got, David Loring. Like the list of Skip Barber instructors at that era was incredible. Like some of the most brilliant guys you've ever met in your life. And I'm over there holding court in the corner, giving feedback as a driver in the series to other racers, my contemporaries, people I'm racing against, like not smart. Like, hey, that's me. And Simon Kirkby taking me aside and going, I want to give you a job as an instructor. And I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing. Like I can make that pays money. And by the way, it's it pays about the same as we were just talking about. But anyway, and that was in 1991. And so anyway, that's kind of how it sort of started, where I went from just racing, trying to figure out my next move as a racing driver, to now having a little side hustle as a race car driver, my first side hustle. And then that that led into corporate stuff where I was doing like ride and drive stuff. And then I'm talking in front of big groups, and then I'm talking in front of corporations. And then I have a bit of an engineering background. I'm doing vehicle validation work for Skip Barber and for Michelin. So tire validation, vehicle validation. So now I'm working with engineers. So I'm doing public speaking for groups of 10 to 80 to 100, doing ride and drive stuff. I'm racing, and now I'm also doing vehicle validation work for tire manufacturers, tire validation and vehicle validation work for vehicle. And that was in the span of like 2 or 3 years. Like it suddenly just went poof and went exponential.
Yeah.
And so that you just meet people doing that, right? I mean, I'm doing this for all sorts of companies, and I'm traveling to Europe, and I'm doing this and that, and I'm just going places, and now I ended up by fast forward, it took about 8 years, but I was the chief instructor of the special projects group, which was the biggest part of Skip Barber at the time. And now I am like a kind of a director salary level with Skip Barber, doing everything they have their hands in, writing curriculums, training instructors, all of that stuff had happened in those years. And then I took that. We basically got headhunted. We were running Formula BMW at the time, and I was the chief instructor at Formula BMW, as well as the special projects instructor. That's where I knew Nico Rondet really well, Rod McLeod, Pete Argidsinger. All those guys were some of the top guys in Formula BMW as instructors. And we got headhunted at the Bahrain World Finals for Formula BMW by a massive hedge fund out of England called Pall Mall Partners that were based in London. And those guys gave us a blank checkbook. And with that, we bought the Jim Russell Racing Drivers School. And when I say we, it was 4 of us that left Skip Barber. 2 of us remained by the end of it, because it was just this calamitous, crazy process of the years of spending $14 million in a very short time to create a totally state-of-the-art racing school where I went to Lola, and I was designing the car. I designed the intake manifold that's on the car. I negotiated the engines. I did everything with that 26 F3 cars we bought. And then we got the Audi sports car experience. And then we got the Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution experience. All that stuff happened over a very short amount of time. We're building a facility at Turn 1 at Sonoma Raceway. And just this stuff just goes. And the same time, I'm the Stig. At the same time, I am with Hot Wheels with my buddy Tanner Faust, and we're setting the world record jumping distance in a vehicle at the Indy 500. So like, and I'm racing. I through that period of time, I was a factory driver for Volvo, and then I worked my way up through Insight Racing with, founded a team with one other guy, and we went ST and GS racing in Continental Tire Championship, and so I probably World Challenge, all of that, and then I'm coaching the whole time. So all of that stuff is happening simultaneously, but that's kind of like the arc of this unpredictable, like I didn't see any of that coming. You just meet people and you talk, right? And you like each other, and you're like, let's do this together. I think you're a good fit for this. And you're like, okay, I've never done that before, but I'm willing to learn.
So when you were putting these different programs together, and you said that you were driving for other teams as well, did they just reach out to you and go, hey, we need a good driver, and we know that you are doing everything else in the world, including being the Stig, but can you do this for us as well?
Well, obviously, like no one knew I was the Stig, and the Stig thing, if anything, like really hurt my racing a lot, because it kept it was an inflexible schedule that was random. So I had to keep stuff open for that. And so there were only 4 people that knew who I was. And my boss at Emotive at Jim Russell was one of those people. So they gave me that flex. I knew I had to tell him, because I was like, I'm a salaried employee. I'm going to randomly leave a lot. It's like, okay, you're a drug dealer. What are you?
Right.
So I'm like, okay, here's a person I have to tell. I kept the circle really close. So it actually hurt my racing, because I was so randomly off doing that. But it was, the team thing is always, the phone never rings. Like for you, it's someone you've met. So it's like a friend of Steve Dinan. It's like stuff like that. It's a contact of someone I've met along the way. It's a buddy of John Hennessy. It's any one of the industry people that I've met and have a good working relationship. I've never been someone that I'm a pretty even keeled, positive guy. I try to be almost all the time. That's just sort of my nature, I guess. So I'm not a bridge burner. Even when I've had really bad team experiences, which I have, I stay friends with everyone. There's good people in bad teams, right? It's just the circumstances that usually turn things sour. Not like it's a bunch of evil individuals,
Right.
And they end up on good teams later, whether literally like the truck driver. Like I've had stuff from the truck driver recommending me to the team because I got along really well with the truck driver, you know what I mean? On my prior team. So it's like never burn a bridge. make friends with everybody, treat everybody respectfully and equally, and all that kind of Dale Carnegie 101 stuff, right?
Sure.
And over 30 years in the industry, you got a lot of friends, a lot of buddies, and from that, they're people that think about you, and you can call at any time. And I've got contacts just up and down the grids, as I think anyone does in the industry when you spent this much time there. It's that literal small world that we always talk about.
Yeah, and what I find just so humorous about the kind of thing that we do in the backgrounds that we have and how we got there is like, for a lot of us, you, me, we've invested a lot of our own time and money to become proficient, if not beyond above proficient level at this. But yet most of us that do this kind of thing, if we were taken out of the automotive world and plopped down into some other industry, we are completely unqualified because our resumes look like shit because they're untransferable most of the time.
Yeah. It only works in our weird little corner of the world.
And yet we have these immense amounts of talents in various things that all contribute to the level of how we're performing in whether it's the Formula BMW, a driving program, wherever it is. We are good at what we do, but outside of that little bubble of that world that we choose to live in, we're largely unqualified.
Yeah. I'm just now dipping my toe outside of automotive, because from the book and everything that I've done, and I've done a few of these now. So when I say dipping my toe, I've established a bit of a beachhead, might be a better analogy, but I'm doing like motivational work or team building outside of automotive, using the metaphor of racing as the backbone of my teaching.
Oh, that sounds pretty interesting. We're gonna have to dig into that here during the show. But I want to just kind of go back a little bit, just because you talked about having you talked about Winfield in racing in Europe. Let's just kind of get a little bit better grip on everything that you've raced. What did you start racing and when, and how did that progression of your racing, minus the Stig, minus the instructing, take us through the timeline of Paul Gerard's racing career?
Well, like I said, lots of gaps, because no funding, and I'll be really blunt right now. Like, if I knew what I knew now when I was racing then, I think anyone would say this. So this is not some epiphany, but this is just frank honesty. I was really bad at getting myself in cars. Like, I was the guy that waited for the phone to ring that never rang. I had a marketing guy, great, lovely guy, still friends with him, great guy. But no one will put you in that car like you can. And it took me a long time to learn that. And so I missed a lot of opportunities, and I was arrogant when I was young. Some might say I still am. But when I was young, I definitely was. Frankly, it was almost, so arrogance is a necessary component as a race car driver in the car. It does you nothing but harm outside of the car. You kind of need to be a little bit of a jerk when you're a driver. There's opportunity.
Okay, you can say you can be a dick.
Yeah, you have to seize it. I mean, and I've always been that guy. Like, last corner, I don't care. I am going for it. I will make a
Send
gap.
it.
Yeah, it's gonna happen, and I'm gonna see what turns out, and I'll just shrug my shoulders if it doesn't, and try it again the very next opportunity it's presented to me. And I still have that within me, and why I still like to race. Like the Senna quote. If you don't go for a gap, it rings.
You're no longer a driver.
Yeah, it rings very, very true, right?
That's exactly who I was thinking of when you said that. I was like, that's exactly how Senna was.
And I think, I mean, you can use that as a pretty good litmus test when people do time out of driving. I'm not a young man. I'm 57 years old, or will be in a couple months, and I still will go for that gap. I'm still that knucklehead that'll do that. But back to my original point, like, I thought I did think the phone would ring, and I went to Winfield, and I had a very dominant performance at Winfield. I mean, I broke the track record. My first time I'd ever gotten a race car in my life. I broke the track record on my third day at Winfield, and was easily the quickest person. And I'm like, that's it, it's done. I went to the Monaco Grand Prix that next week, and I was just like, yep, I just this
will be me in a year or two.
I'm rubbing elbows with Senna, and I mean I remember when I was there, I literally was in the paddock and I chatted with quite a few drivers, and I was like, this is me in a few years. I'll have an I'm going to run Formula Renault next year. I'll probably win that. I'll get an F3, but the brute reality was that nobody really wanted me over there. Nobody wanted a fast American at the time. I was born in England, but considered to be an American, certainly, because I spent most of my life here. And that was brought up right away by Elf, who was just like, we have no interest in sponsoring an American. So they basically went full Michael Massey.
Damn.
That's funny. That's the first time I've used that analogy, and I like it. And they just changed the rules. They just changed the rules on me. Like
I like how spicy it is. It's wonderful.
I know. But they literally changed the rules as they were giving out the awards to not give me the awards that I deserved.
Oh, wow.
And they gave it to a guy who I've never actually met and spoke to for real. Like he was there then, but he's still racing. Emanuele Collard, who is still a factory driver. Mm-hmm. He was about 4 years younger than me. He was the French national karting champion. He was also the European karting champion. And I beat him badly at Winfield, and they gave him my award.
And
he was the second place guy.
And they just bent you over and made you take it.
Yeah, and they did it in the ceremony. I was like, it was like one of those things where you hear them describing this person did this, and this, and you're like, they're talking about me right now. And I'm getting ready to stand up and go get the award, and they called out his name. And then,
Jesus.
Yeah, and the thing was, like, it was, that whole competition was literally supposed to only be about your single fastest lap. The whole competition was based on that.
So there's no sponsorship obligations. There's nothing. It's just no sponsorship obligation. There's no audience to look at. It's just that single technical.
That's it.
Time. That's it.
They ask you about everything else, but that was the whole appeal of Winfield at the time, was the single fastest lap. Like the fastest driver wins. And so when they were amending it, they tried to go to a 10-lap average. Guess what? I was still the fastest over the 10-lap average. So once that didn't work anymore, and what they had done, here's the crazy part, was they had sent away. I met this amazing instructor on my first day there, and his name was Roland Rees. And Roland was he was awesome. He was Eric Bernard, Jean Alesse's, Alain Prost. He was best friends with those guys. Like, that school when I was there, had put out 21 Formula One drivers. That's why I went there.
Winfield was the shit, man.
They were all French. Every single one of them was French. Like, duh. But anyway, Roland was super cool, and he could care less that I was American, right? And so I went into the car the first day, and they kept telling us, like, build up your speed gradually, don't drive quickly. And I was an arrogant young man, and I didn't listen, and I just went for it. The first time I got in the car, I went for it. And by the way, if you spun once, they sent you home. You were gone. And it did happen to people. And I got along. First time I'd ever been on a racetrack in my life, first time I'd ever been in a race car of any type, and it was a Formula Renault, a little 1.5 liter turbocharged, but it was a sweetheart to drive. And so I got along with the car like right away. I'm like, this thing's awesome. And so by the end of the first day, Roland took me aside and he goes, "What have you done?" And by the way, I spent the whole day getting in trouble by driving too hard all day, right? And Roland took me aside at the end, and he was like, "You didn't listen to me all day." And I was like, "I'm sorry." I go, I'm excited to be here.
Right. What else could you say, right?
You can imagine, like, I'm just imagining what an idiot I was this whole time, right? I mean, oh my God. I mean,
so go ahead.
So Roland told me right then, the end of the first day, he goes, "What have you done?" And I said, "This is the first racetrack I've ever been on in my life. I've done some autocrossing." And he goes, what's autocrossing? And I'm like, I think you call it gymkhana over here. It's parking lots with cones. He's like, no karting? I'm like, no. My parents never let me do anything. So that's why I had no background when I was a kid. But I ski raced, I bike raced, I did all that. That was my background, right? Which I talk about in my book. It's the same thing. And so Roland's just like shaking his head at me. And he goes, if what you are telling me is true, if you listen to me, you will win Pilat Elf this year, the whole championship. He goes, you've got it in the bag. And I was just like, I mean, I was sort of like taken back. Again, arrogant me goes, yeah, that's what I expected to hear. But actually, that still even shocked me. I even went to all my friends that I knew that I had met. And I had one friend that was there that I was a close friend with. Who's still in the industry, by the way, still best friends. I said, did Roland tell you? I thought maybe this is a thing he said to everybody to encourage them. I'm like, did Roland tell you you would win? He's like, no. He didn't say that.
He doesn't say that to anybody.
I'm like, did you get like a weird pep talky thing? And they're like, no. And I'm like, okay. So I took it to heart, right? And so I stuck to Roland like glue, as you would imagine, right? For the rest of the thing.
Hell yeah.
And I was the fastest guy in the class, and I got the certificate, and you're coming back for the finals. Semifinals and finals, I believe, was in October. So I walked it. So that's when I went to the Monaco Grand Prix. It was after getting that certificate, after Roland told me that. And after watching other people get sent home, and I was faster than all the karting champion. This is a full American group. And then quicker than all the guys that had came there that year, because I had that track record, right? No one ever beat it. And come back to the finals and had a great finals. Everything was going in lockstep, as it should be, and then sitting at the dinner and handing it to another guy.
So did they tell you before the award ceremony that you weren't going to be it, or was like
I
the
was
announcement?
Getting pats on the back from everybody. And here's the one thing I omitted. They sent Roland away on the last day.
You think that's because he probably would have basically thrown a shit fit if he would have?
He totally. He was telling everyone the whole time, like when I went back for the semifinals, like it's a lock. And he was probably doing it a little too loudly. And they brought in what's his name? He was the guy that ran Winfield at Magny-Cours. So Winfield was at Paul Ricard, and then also at Magny-Cours. So they had two locations, and that's where they used to run the French Grand Prix and so on and so forth. Right. So they brought in, his name was, it's funny because it's like my last name, but it's Gerard. And I think it was, I can't remember his last name now. Simon de la Tour ran he was an English guy with a very French name, ran the Paul Ricard location. And Gerard, and I want to say, I can't remember his last name again, but anyway, he came over and he took Roland's place at the final day. And that was the day that I got hosed. And
this is an inside job from
it was, and it was Elf. It was plainly Elf. Again, 21 Formula One drivers, all French. And by the way, there had been a couple of guys that had come through and had won Pilat Elf. There was an American before me, and Richie Hearn was an American after me that went into IndyCar. And I like to think that kind of like me throwing a tantrum afterwards, was about all I could do. I was there for like a day, and then I was flying home, right? So it was just like kind of stunned silence for a lot of that time. But I did pitch a fit to the best of my ability with a guy, John Peterson, who was the guy that used to organize it. And he told me I was robbed. He's like, you were robbed. And I'm like, yeah, it's supposed to be based on the fastest guy. It's like, it's not like a gray area that I was robbed. Yeah. I was robbed. Like it's so all of those things are, kind of factors and all that. But again, I was arrogant and naive, and this was a slap in the face that I sorely needed to kind of get with the program and realize this was going to be work, and it's not just based on there's people that come along that are quick every year, and they're not always the one that get the seats, and it takes some luck. And actually, I know a little like a Davy Jones's story, because a dear friend of mine's dad, who I knew as well, he passed away a few years ago, was an American that was in Formula One with the Ensign team that sponsored Davy. in F3, and he pushed Davey along, you know, and so you need those moments. You need to have that serendipity of just meeting this person that happens to go, you remind me of me when I was a kid moments, right? Where it's not your dad because your dad didn't have money, but you get that shot because you make a good impression with someone, and they throw a season's worth of cash your way, and you make it count by performing like Davey did, you know. And those are those moments that really matter. And I'm just like, through my career, I didn't have a lot of that, and maybe frankly I wasn't charming enough as Davey was, or the ones that did, or my timing was off, you know, or whatever it was. But I did manage to race a lot of stuff, you know. I did do that, but I didn't make it a Formula One. You know, I tested a lot of things. I was in Europe. I was with John Village. I remember him John Village was this awesome team owner back in the Vauxhall Lotus days. He was a lovely guy, and his cars won. I mean, and John, I did a test with them, and he's like, you just need to bring me some cash, man. He goes, you'll run well. You know, you're going to be on the podium regularly, you know, because I had a really good test at Brands Hatch with him. And he's like, but I can't do it for free, you know. And I'm like, all right. You know, so I was a member of the British American Business Association. I lived in DC at the time. I was going to these business meetings at the British Embassy, like monthly, hanging out with the heads of all these corporations that were British and American, did businesses in both, you know, just doing everything I could. But holy cow, I never got back over there and got that formula car break I wanted to get up into, you know, do F3000 and get into F1. So none of that happened. So I just came back over here and just piecemealed it together, basically building a network and jumping in cars whenever I could. I was very lucky to have guys like P.D. Cunningham, who's one of the winningest drivers ever in sports car racing anywhere. And Boris said, like, I did some driving with PD. I did some Skip Barber stuff with him. Then he let me run his real-time cars for a while in tests and doing things. And PD kind of took me under his wing, and he and Boris would like drive me around the paddock at Sebring, knowing everybody and going, put this guy in a car. He's fast. And so just like their recommendations got me seats in Firehawk and, you know, random rides like that. But I was doing all that. And then like the Volvo thing came around because it's a friend of mine and I went and pitched. We walked into the boardroom at Volvo and just cold pitched the CEO at the time. I'm trying to remember his name, South African guy that used to run, Vic Doolan, who used to run BMW. And so I knew Vic. He and I had done a PSA with BMW's Ultimate Driving Experience on the NBC Nightly News with Peter Jennings, because I was the talking head for that. So I knew Vic from that. So I walked in the boardroom and he's like, do we know each other? And I was like, yeah, we did BMW stuff back in the day. He's like, holy cow, that's right. And so I sat in the boardroom in Irvine, California, and got a $2 million a year Volvo touring car program based on, he remembered me from doing the nightly news with him like 5 years before.
That's crazy.
And we walked out of there. I had this suit that my mom had bought me, still one of my only suits. I don't own a lot of suits. My mom bought me like in high school, and I had like boots on because I didn't have dress shoes at the time. And so I went into this boardroom with a buddy of mine, and we got this program, a factory racing program, in one meeting. He looked over, I remember this, he looked over at this guy named John Morley, I think it was, who ended up being the CEO after Vic, in this one meeting. And this happened to be, the timing was so good. It was when Volvo first had its huge big sales spike, and they went over 100,000 units. So that was like when we were in the boardroom. And he just looks over at John and he goes, 2 million a year. He goes, we just have to basically raise the price of the cars, like, you know, like, I don't know, 10, 15 bucks a car, and that would cover this racing program, and we'll have a racing pro. And John kind of goes, he was the COO, and he just looked back at him and he goes, yeah. And Vic goes, done.
Beautiful. Wow. If weren't they all that easy?
Yeah.
Well, Bob Miller's the name of the guy, right? And Bob and I walked out of the meeting and we looked at each other and he goes, did he just say yes? And then John walked out afterwards. He he put his arm around us and he goes, we have to figure out how this is going to work. But yeah, that's a yes. And so we jumped on a plane. I had a contact, a guy, this really cool guy. He was from McLaren Formula One, and his name will pop in my head in a second. But I knew him from some work I had done with One Lap, and he had put together the Rentec cars that I had run in One Lap. And Rentec is based down in Florida, and he was the head engineer on Rentec. And so this is how you put it together, right? So I'm like, I'm going to call him because he's a Formula One guy. He'll know what to do. And so Bob and I flew to Florida. Like 2 days later, we met up with him. We went to the closest Volvo dealer in West Palm Beach. And we're like, we better look at this car we're racing next year. Because we only had like the winter to build it. And so we went, and I remember crawling underneath the back of it. Very, very distinctly remember this. And looking at the rear axles. And they were like the size of coat hangers. Because it's an all-wheel drive car, but it's basically 90% front drive, and it chucks a little rear drive. And I thought, yeah, we'll just be able to take this stock car and turn it into a competitive World Challenge GT car running against Vipers and Corvettes, and the Cadillacs were there at the time. Remember those cheater Cadillacs that were there for years? Yeah. Section bodies, which was totally against the rules, but they got around that by sponsoring the championship.
Of course they did. That's how
so
that
they
works.
let them have the whole cheater car. And so then we built this car over the winter. After realizing like this car was not ready to become a competitive car. And that's how that program went. And that went for years. And by the way, guess who my teammate was? Derek Bell, five-time Le Mans winner. And so he and I became great friends over that. Derek is just like a legend. And my Skip Barber days, I'd become really good friends with like Vic Elford and, all these just legends in the sport that I've spent so many dinners with and had so many amazing conversations with. These are all the things that I like cherish out of this crazy journey I've been on, where I didn't make it over there, but I'm really good friends. I'm really proud to say really good friends with so many people. And even the Audi stuff, like I'm really good friends with Emanuele Pirro. I'm really good friends with Alan McNish. I still talk to him regularly, who's just one of not only a top driver that I rate so highly in the pantheon of drivers, but just a genuine professional in the industry and a lovely guy. Wrote the preface to my book and so on and so forth. So there's like all the crazy stuff that comes out of this. And then I ended up with a BMW team that I put together and helped put together. It was based on my recommendations. Went out and grabbed Steve Dinan again and said, Steve, I need you to come in. I had him on the Volvos. He was in on the Volvos as a chassis engineer. All these things. It's just friends of friends network, and it's just cool. But so I've been able to kind of race, but it's been, I had 4 championships when Time Attack was really big, and it was a global Time Attack series. I was racing for a team out of Chicago. We won a lot of stuff there, and the Volvo team eventually, thankfully, won championships, and the BMWs did really well. We had lots of podiums. So everything ended up being really competitive and really good teams. And I think all of that. And at the same time, I'm also, coaching people continuously. And I'm running different racing schools at these times, right? Like while all this is going on, and I'm being the Stig, and I'm jumping trucks, as I was, suggesting, doing all this stuff. And then that kind of all leads me to a point where I'm like, I'm going to write a racing book, because I'm just sort of sick and tired of everything that I've seen and how schools do it. And I just sort of felt there was a better way. And so I start researching now every racing book I can. I'm reading everything, even in other languages. I'm finding translated versions and doing all that stuff. And that leads me to, to writing Optimum Drive. As Kevin, you very humbly, told me like it was a different book, and it was intentionally a really different book, because I thought it was teaching, and racing and all that stuff, I don't think was, is done in a very efficient manner. That might be the polite way of putting it. And so I wanted to kind of bring the psychological component into all of it. Like, we're teaching human beings here. You have to accept that we're all different and we learn differently. And you're not programming a computer here. You're trying to teach a human. And then getting people to understand what the true limit of the car was, because that was the other disconnect that I found over all those years is people have a different idea of why great drivers are great, thinking it's some sort of like supernatural gift or something. And it's like, no, it's
it's not.
It's this. Let's just write it. Write it. I don't know why this isn't written everywhere, but it's not. So I just wrote it all out in the book, and it was, again, all these experiences getting to deal with all these really amazing people that I've dealt with in motorsports that have elevated my game along the way. And I talk a lot about like Michelin. I learned so much from that company. It has this amazing culture of greatness. Like they're good enough is ridiculously above the heads of any other company I've ever worked with. Like the quality of their product is astonishing. And you see that methodology in how they develop stuff, right? And you steal it. You're like, right. Oh, that's good. That's going to be part of what I do. That's part of my repertoire, from this point forward. And so that's kind of, that's me like landing here on this podcast, like a bit of a ramble, but that's kind of how I got where I got.
That ramble was filled with a bunch of cool nuggets of stories, especially the Winfield days. And it's like, as I'm listening to you say that, Paul, I think of a couple things, and I'm sure you'll agree with me on this, but it's like, inevitably the ones that wind up in the Formula One drives, winning championships in Indy cars, in sports cars, prototypes, whatever, it always comes down to the for whatever reason, the people that are able to be with the right people in the right place at the right time, like the Schumachers, like the Senna, those, or the McNish for that matter, all those championships and Le Mans victories that he had. But I'm also struck by, just knowing that heartbreak of the Winfield deal, because I went through something similar when I went through the Spinard School up in Canada back in the late 80s, because it was set up kind of similar to the Winfield deal. But, that gut-wrenching disappointment and having it ripped out of you and having your guts ripped out, knowing that you were, you had it. We just interviewed a guest for another show yesterday, and he went through something very similar in his career. But what that then wound up doing is, like you found all these other ways to fill the cup back up and feel fulfilled and satisfied and being able to do what you wanted to do. Maybe not quite at the level, but it's expanded your capabilities and your boundaries, probably far beyond what you would have thought had it gone the way you initially wanted it to.
Yeah. I can't complain. I mean, that's the bottom line is I think a lot of it sounds like sour grapes, because at the moment it happened, it wasn't the outcome you wanted. But, you just kind of dig in and you get a little smarter, and you fail your way to some level of success, which is, certainly a popular topic these days with any sort of, corporate training or motivational training or any self-help books that you'll ever read. It's like, that these are all just learning opportunities,
Right.
And again, you meet people, and the people, you kind of break little chunks of them off in a way, and they get a little piece of you too. And I have amazing phone calls almost on a daily basis, like with vehicle dynamicists that call me because they want some sort of subjective explanation of something they're measuring, and things like, and getting to come on and do podcasts like this, and having relationships with guys. I've had this really long relationship with a guy named Nico Ronde, who's one of my best friends. And we just see eye to eye on all this driving stuff. And he's a brilliant driver and a brilliant triathlete. And like the things that we bounce back and forth in conversation, it's like, it's always like so meaningful. And there's something that is gained from that. And I have that network. And I think, God, how lucky I am. Like, how lucky am I to know these people? And I, include you in that, Kevin, the conversations that we got to have at COTA, the first time we really met, and got to talk, and all of these things. And so it's an amazing thing. And from that, I've been able to coach, so yeah, I've won my share of championships, nowhere near what I wanted to do. My driving, I'll always think like I should have done better. And I think that's just part of our nature, my nature, But my teaching and my coaching, I mean, there are a lot of championships in there, with kids that I've been able to coach, and adults that I've been able to coach, and all of that. So it's kind of that pay it forward thing, and stay positive and be really, really thankful that I didn't have to spend my career that's still going sitting in a cubicle. I've been able to do it at the top of Pikes Peak, for God's sake, driving a silly fast car and meeting amazing, you meet really cool people at the top of Pikes Peak, really cool people. It just continues, and that's the thing. Like, I look at that entry list at Pikes Peak every year, and it just came out a few days ago, which is why I would even mention it. I'm looking down there going, yes, because I'm not like I have to compete against this guy. In a way, I'm like, oh no. But in a way, I'm like, I can't wait to have that inevitable conversation with them that we're going to have either down at the bottom or up at the top or somewhere in the middle or practice days. And I'm going to get to hang out with this idol of mine, with this dude or whomever that I've never met, that I want to pick their brain, and I'm a huge fan, and that's amazing. I just feel really privileged to have those moments.
You're absolutely right, Paul. And there's, I say it all the time too. It's like there are a lot worse things that we could be doing for a living than what we get to do, and we do get to do it. It's, I couldn't foresee, sitting in a cubicle like you said, that would not be a good fit.
Yeah, and I think to me, that was always the smart choice, right? Because I probably again, as you get older, I'm just like, I'm looking at my retirement going, wow, I did not plan this well. I'm going to be working till the day I drop, kind of thing. And that's the choice. That's the choice. And if you're young listening to this, realize that's the choice. I was told this in the beginning too. There's two ways to go racing. That is to try and go racing when you're young and see if you take a shot at it. And if it takes and you're able to sustain a career in motorsports. Or you go make a fortune being a clever person, sitting in a cubicle, working your way into a corner office, and then you go to Ferrari Challenge and you go racing, or you go to AMG Academy and you go race. You can do it that way as well. So those are the two. And so my choice was I was an arrogant kid, and I'm like, I will make it. I kind of did. I made it in a really weird way that I didn't foresee, and I still think of as a failure as far as the motorsports side of it. But I managed to make a career out of it. I still kind of scratch my head and going, what if I had knuckled down and just become an engineer and made a good salary as an engineer, been tucking money away in a 401k? It sounds really, really boring, but I would have had a much better retirement coming up, if I had done that, and I would have had a very different life, but
it could have been like a John Heinrichsey kind of a thing.
Yeah, whatever. It could go. It could have gone either way, and it is what it is, and you got to make the best of your choices, right? And that's the other thing. It's like none of it's cast in stone. It's all just, it all starts out as little simple decisions that compound over time. If you keep heading into something, into a life choice, and that's, you end up, on a podcast.
And see, this is the sort of thing that, again, I'm not in the industry, but as we talked about before we started, I have this interview with Skip Barber coming up next month as a tech, essentially, and I've never really been chasing the automotive dream, because basically I didn't have the access, I didn't have the money, and not necessarily that I'm looking for a driver. I just love cars. I'm obsessed with cars and racing. And here I am, I'm 42 years old. I have a pretty decent day-to-day job. And here I am still looking at going to Skip Barber and trying to find my into motorsports, because I love it so much. It just, I have this massive passion, just like you, just like Kevin. It's just, I don't feel like my day-to-day job is where I belong. I belong in some form of racing, whatever facet that may be, and whether it's an office or as a mechanic. I'm never going to be a driver, because, again, 42 years old, there's no way, unless I become rich and do, like you were saying, like a Ferrari Challenge or something like that. But, so I can attest to being, a little bit on the edge of, is this the right move? But yet there's still part of me saying, go do it, because something may become of it. Even if like what you're saying, if you have to work to the day you die, if I'm in motorsport, if I get lucky enough to continue that and really be in a substantial piece of it, I don't care.
Yeah. And I think it is. I mean, it does come down to that, doesn't it? I mean, it's a desire thing. And I think that's the way it was with me, was like, I didn't know how to get a job in a cubicle. I mean, you kind of said that earlier, Kevin. It's like, I don't know how to live like normal. And so it's like you're traveling 150 days a year and having I've had like over a dozen 1099s at the end of a year. Like that's my normal, and like I said, having these random conversations and stuff like, hey, theoretically, I mean, I had I just got like a bunch of kooky ones, irons and fires right now, where one is teaching truck drivers that are babysitting autonomous vehicles that are driving down the road,
Wow.
driver training for them. Right. So it goes in these weird, crazy directions, anything you're dealing with. And I've been an expert witness in court cases, for car crashes. There's just stuff, it's all related, vehicle dynamics related to understanding and being able to describe what a car does at its limit and what a human being needs to be doing at that moment to control it. And so like everything is built out of having this presence of mind in that moment. When Simon Kirkby first plucked me out of the race paddock, he heard me doing that, right? And so and it was just like, that's something I'd done. I remember, like I talk about in my book, like doing random stupid stuff as a kid, and I used to be the guy, I would sit back and ponder. I always had that kind of that engineering mindset. As when I was 8 years old, I thought about stuff like that. 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, I was looking at a jump, trying to gauge speed. I mean, what's it take to clear the gap, right? Like how fast can I stuff the front end of my BMX bike in the corner before it washes out? If I swing my leg out like the motocross guys do, can I get a little bit more speed on that entry? If I'm up over the front, does it wash out more? If my weight's more to the right, does it push down further and give me more grip? I mean, on a pair of skis, all the same thing, right? And so that's been me, like, since I was a little kid, this curiosity. And what fuels that? Yeah, it's the mild version is I'm curious in how good I can be at stuff. The really obvious, more negative one is I've got an ego and I like beating people. And I've got the presence of mind to try and dissect it and figure out how to go faster. And I've always thought like that. And in the beginning, I have a 5-year-old brother. I was desperate to keep up with him, let alone beat him. So I think my analytical approach came from wanting to keep up with my brother so I could hang out with him. Because if I was too slow, he would literally just leave me wherever it was, And so I had to figure out how to keep up with my big brother. And then that led me with, like, when I was able to operate on a level as a 10-year-old where I could keep up with a 15-year-old, when I was hanging out with my friends, I could kick their butts.
Yeah, right. It's like playing against people who are better than you.
This is it. Like, this is it. And I liked that idea. And I realized, like, hanging out with my big brother let me beat my friends, And so I'm like, this is kind of cool. And so it gave me like a mindset really early on that I took to the ski hill. I took to the BMX track. I won a BMX championship the first year and the only year I ever raced, because I quit after I won the first championship. I was like, done with that, move on to another sport, which is what I did. I used to bounce around. I was in middle school, myself and this kid named Roger Bennett. I'm not a great athlete. I was pretty good. Roger actually went to the Olympics as a triple jumper. And this guy was such a pothead. I don't know how he did it. But Roger was a gifted athlete, but we were really good friends. We had this quasi Olympics in middle school, and Roger and I qualified for every event in the Olympics that we had at the middle school. That was our goal. And he was better than me. He was always in front of me. The only thing I could do was some like quick speed stuff I could do quicker than him when you're changing direction really quickly. Like a 50-yard dash, I could beat Roger, but 100-yard, he smoked me. Because I was just little. Like, I didn't have his stride. He was like 6'2" and I'm 5'7",
Gotcha.
But like that was me. When I said I was arrogant as a kid, that was me. I'm going to qualify for every event. Like that was where I set the bar. And yes, and so I was just like, that was like my mindset. But really, it all came from me wanting to keep up with my big brother. Like, if I were to really pin it down.
Yeah, and people say it all the time. Whether you're playing, the common area, like the basketball courts in a pickup game or something like that. It's like they tell you, so many coaches tell you to play against or practice against someone who's better than you.
Absolutely.
Don't play or practice against people who are just as good as you, because you'll never improve. If you play against or drive against people who are better than you, you're going to learn something, and it'll make you a better driver,
It
better
just
athlete, better
steepens
football player. What?
Yeah. It's going to steepen that
100%.
learning curve, and it's going to be hard and frustrating and tiring and difficult, but you'll learn faster. There's no quicker way to learn than putting yourself behind the curve, in that environment. But it takes you've got to have like this stubbornness in you to do that, to not wash out of that, So that's the downside.
You're right. You do have to have that certain degree of stubbornness and stick-to-itiveness and discipline, for that matter, to stick with it and not get disillusioned, not get frustrated and give up too soon, because you got to push through that block, whether it's a physical wall, a mental wall, the pain mentally or physically, whatever. You just got to keep sticking with it to get to the other side. So awesome.
And I think my problem, just to kind of put a bow on that a little bit, to kind of tie it to what we were talking about, like, how do I end up being too arrogant at Winfield? And this is like a cautionary tale for anyone that listens to this, right? Finds himself in this situation. Because I had this system, right, when I was young, and I figured out how to beat people early. And I figured out what to do, just as you said, like, go practice with the best, right? And then when you go back to whatever playing field, whatever pond you're on, if you're in the big pond with the big fish, and you're surviving there, you go back to the little pond and you can dominate. It's like, that's just what'll happen. And so when I went to Winfield, I already knew, I knew I was going to be fast in that race car, even though I hadn't been in a race car. So none of this surprised me. So I wasn't prepared for them not being fair to me.
I get you.
I wasn't ready for that. I thought the world was going to gift me this Formula One drive, because I knew I was going to be fast enough. Like, I knew I was going to be quick, because I knew I was really well prepared to be fast. And anything I had ever done prior to that in a car, I was fast. And so I thought, job is done.
Yeah, right.
That was my huge mistake, right? And that was my arrogance, was saying, now, as soon as I show them the lap time, they'll stick to that. And any of us that have spent any time in the real world, everyone had their version of it when I brought it up. And we've all heard 100 versions of my story, right? Yeah. And the people that persevered, like, there would have been a level of me that could have been prepared enough that I could have taken them to court over that, right? I could have done things, because they didn't stick to what they said they were going to do. It was in writing that it was the fastest lap. They're French. They just ignored it. But there was a level of me that could have been prepared enough, that could have anticipated that outcome and been ready for it, and had an A, B, C, D backup plan. I had nothing. That was my arrogance, right? Where I thought the phone will ring, as John said in the beginning, the phone's going to ring, for me. It's like, it doesn't, the world is a cruel place. And actually, if you're really good at something, it's going to be even crueler. People are super nice to you when they recognize you can't threaten them. In the world of racing, that means you're not faster or as fast as they are. They'll be super nice to you. They'll give you advice. They'll introduce you to people. But as soon as you get to a level where you look like you're because why? It's gladiator school. That's what this is. It's a competitive industry. There are very few good seats. You can't play that fair. And there are people that do on most levels, but even in film, where I'm doing SAG-AFTRA stunt stuff and precision driving stuff, it's exactly the same there. My son is a musician. It's exactly the same there. When it gets down to it, there are very few record contracts. There are very few TV movies for driving and commercials to drive in. It's a tiny pool of people that consistently do this stuff, and they protect it. And they protect it to whatever means they can. Because we're talking about the top of the pyramid here in very desirable, lucrative industries. Top racing drivers, a top IMSA paid pro is getting $300,000 a year to drive in GT Pro. You know, a top driver is getting 500 to 750 to drive in LMDH, you know, or DPI class. You know, and there are only 10, 15 of those seats in those series. That's it.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
there are 100,000 people that want those seats just in the United States, not to mention the 50,000 in Europe and the 25,000 in Asia that want those seats. And by the way, could turn a lap time that could put them in those seats. You know, so that's the reality of the world we live in, right?
And the bigger the event, Formula One, you know, probably
that's
arguably that's the most protected. So you're really pushing the issue of, I want to be a Formula One driver. Good luck.
Yeah, and by the way, it is absolutely doable. I mean, hell, you just look at Lewis. You know, Lewis Hamilton came from not much. You know, I mean, it's well documented. The you know, the row house in Stevenage, his dad working 2 jobs there.
Right.
He's one of the cool things, kind of to what we were talking about. One of the things that made Lewis fast was sort of this handicap that he had, that they couldn't afford new tires. So they never had the best kart. And he was out racing against rich kids.
Used tires,
by the way, who's the rich kid? Nico Rosberg.
Yeah.
He's been racing against Nico since he was super young. Like, they were racing when they were 7, 8 years old. They knew each other. They were racing. Nico had his dad, KK, who was a world champion, one of the coolest world champions ever, by the way.
Yes.
KK and Nico couldn't be any different. I'm not a huge Nico fan because he's a little bit of a privileged kid. You know, and his dad was nothing like that, right? And Lewis was nothing like that. Everyone talks about Lewis now like he's so privileged, you know, because he's been at the top for so long. But in my eyes, he's earned the right to be the person he is, and God bless him, because the dude gets in a car and gets it done. And he probably had his best year ever last year as far as a driver coming from behind. Holy cow. The drive he put on at the end of the year last year was stunning to watch. I mean, all through the last races. I mean, Brazil being the most obvious one, but Abu Dhabi was an incredible drive from him. And so there's a guy that, you know, he's got that chip on his shoulder. He's got a chip on his shoulder. You say it like it's a negative, you know, like,
no, I think it's a great thing to have a chip on your shoulder.
You know?
Yeah, huge motivator.
I'll be the first to say
motivator. Those huge tires that had to make him so mad when he was a kid. Like, Dad, just buy me some new tires for God's sake. And Dad's like, I wish I could, Lewis. And of course, you're 9 years old. You don't get it. You don't understand why. You think Dad's just being a jerk, you know? But you get in that cart and you're like, Nico, he's going down, you know? And he's after everyone, and he has that, just that drive, and you see that in him even to this day, of like decade of making, you know, 30, 40, 50 million dollars a year. That dude, when he gets in a car and he gets behind, he gets it done. He gets angry. The chip is there and he's on it. And like, half the world hates him for that, and half the world admires him for that, you know? But you got to realize that's the guy he is, you know, and that's what made him what he was. And those used tires, damn it. You know, it's like, I used to race BMX on this really heavy bike, and then I got sponsored and I got a really light bike, and I instantly won the championship. But man, I used to race on this heavy bike, but what did it do? It made me strong, because I had to pedal level with guys that were on lighter bikes, you know?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, these things that you complain about are the things that make you the man you are.
Well, that's right. You can choose to complain about it, or you can use it to your advantage.
Well, you might not see it for years and not realize it's become part of your kind of internal process. You know, you have this, you're a fighter, you know, and that's why I always say, that's why I say in my book, like, the people that are naturally that are handed everything aren't the ones that usually end up winning multiple championships, because they don't have the willpower, because they never had to work through it to get it. They didn't earn it. It was given to them.
That's right. They don't have that intestinal fortitude to work through it. And if it happens young enough to you, it becomes, as I've learned, it becomes hardwired into your brain, right? Yeah. Like you did, having to work that much harder to keep up with your older brother or ride the heavier bike. It's like, you do that when you're young enough, it gets hardwired, man. And you can transfer that to a race car or, you know, whatever.
Because at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and it just comes down to who will outwork the other human being. That's the person that gets the job, the ride, the girl, whatever, right?
Yeah.
That's who gets it.
I am the first to say that I've been, I have my criticisms of Lewis that they're talking about, since we're there. I'll be the first to say I've had my criticisms of him. Not so much of his driving, just more like,
you can't criticize his driving.
No, not at all. But even though for what I'm getting at is for all of my criticisms, well, not all, but the few that I've had of him, I have always been the first to say he is the best driver in the world right now. And yes, I think he's even better than Max. I'm sorry, I do. Max is fantastic, but I think that falls into what you're talking about with the Nico Rosberg thing. Is I feel like Max has this chip on his shoulder that, for me, has never been earned. I think yes, he's a great driver. I'm not denying any of that, but I feel it's the same thing with him. It's just like Max is fantastic, but there's just always been this thing about Max. I just like, it just kind of grinds at me a little bit.
Not like it's been handed to him because of his father.
Exactly.
I mean, he comes at it from an arrogant side versus an angry side. Lewis is more angry. Max is more arrogant. Right. So you look at it. So Lewis has this, everyone's been against me my whole life kind of thing. Right. And again, that has not been the case since he graduated out of, I mean, he freaking killed it in F3, F2, earned his spot in F1. It very famously walks up to Ron Dennis as a 10-year-old saying, I want to drive for you someday.
Yep.
And Ron, Ron's like, who is this kid? This is awesome. As you would. Right. Right. And so all of that, but the thing is, it's like kind of your point, right, Kevin? I mean, you're like, that's ingrained in Lewis, like racing on the crappy tires. And the guy, by the way, like, what is he really great at? It's tire management. Mm-hmm. Like, if you were to look at anything that guy does, like, what is it about Lewis? You look at his pace after 20 laps. That's Lewis's thing. And everyone jokes about, oh, Bono, my tires are shot, and then he sets fastest lap. Yeah, everyone jokes about that, and it's like almost like meme worthy. It has been a meme, But yeah, that's a secret code. There is a code that he has with Bono where he's trying to mislead all the other teams all the time. And yeah, he's
I was going to say it's all psychological warfare.
Everyone's figured it out by now, but it does not disguise the fact of how fast that dude is on used tires, right? And litmus test against Bottas, like Valtteri is a good driver, but holy cow, Lewis's consistent pace over all of his years in Formula One, you just add that up. And I describe this all the time. Like, championships are won not by winning races, but how high you finish on a bad day.
Consistently.
That's how you finish championships. And most people on a bad day finish outside of the top 10. And Valtteri is a very good example of that. Lewis on a bad day is fighting for podium. He's fighting for third on a bad day. And if you look through his whole career, it has always been like that from karting. So when he is given a bad whatever, a bad motor in karting, or a bad chassis in karting, or he gets hit and spun on the first lap in the first corner, by the end of the race, that dude is fighting for a podium.
He sure always
has.
Well, if Valtteri said that in past view, being that now Bottas is out of Mercedes, he would say, he says, if Lewis found out I was getting to the sim at 8:00 in the morning, the next day, Lewis was suddenly there at 7, just because he knew I was getting there at 8.
Yeah.
He always wanted to be ahead of me all the time.
I describe that as healthy paranoia.
Yeah.
Like paranoia, all these things we talk about, this level of determination, this level of everything is bordering on, you're pushing yourself so hard you have mental health issues. Just so we're clear. That's what we're talking about when you're pushing this hard. And so paranoia can be very dangerous, right? It can be unhealthy. But there's also a line where paranoia is useful. Paranoia is like, I don't know that there's some guy out training me somewhere, but I'm going to assume there is. So I'm going to get up now and train.
Yep.
I don't have any evidence at all. I'm winning at everything I do. But, and that's the mindset of a champion. And it is a lonely, weird existence.
It is a lonely, weird existence.
And
True
yeah,
that.
there's everyone wants to be your friend, and it's funny, like when I have these I have these conversations with people. Like I've had this conversation with Derek Bell and with Vic Elford and with Alan McNish and with Emmanuel Piro, like all these guys that I know that have done amazing things in motorsports. And we go very quiet and everyone, and they go very contemplative, and you think about your life. And again, that's where you think about, like, I'm again where I don't complain, because I have this family and it's amazing, and great kids and great wife, and I've had them for long, and it's awesome. Like my home existence is fantastic, and that's the blessing, and that's the thing you're bumping up against. Like it's very, very hard to do those things and have this level of competitiveness that keeps you at the top of your game. It is a very, very difficult existence. It is amazing. It is amazing. You think, like, you just look at it in the NFL or anything like that, where these guys get all this money and success, and how their life is like a reality TV disaster as a result of all of that. Everyone's just trying to get money out of them. Someone wins the lottery, right? It's like it's the worst thing that ever happened to them in their lives, because all of a sudden they've got a big target painted on them, and everyone's trying to have a piece of them. And you're almost like willingly going into a life that's like that by trying to become a top athlete or anything, a top chess player, a top anything. When you're trying to push the limits of human performance, prepare yourself for an uncomfortable existence. It is incredibly rewarding, but it's going to take everything you have, and that's the whole point. Like, how could you ever be world class at anything without it taking everything you've got and making you sacrifice everything else in your life to get
and you
it?
probably that's 100% true, Paul. And you probably heard this story too. Speaking of on the Formula One scale, it's like, when they talked about the new kid at AlphaTauri, Yuki Tsunoda, last year, and how he struggled the first half of the year, and then they finally convinced him to move to Italy to be close to the factory. And suddenly, the last handful of races of the season, his performances got better. Well, he even admitted, that level of discipline and sacrifice that he had to make wasn't there when he was living in his flat up in England, because he would get back from whatever race weekend, and then he would sit in front of his TV and play PlayStation all day instead of, being engaged with the engineers and being at the shop.
Didn't have the healthy paranoia.
He didn't. And now that he's moved there and he's got a little bit more structure and he's got a little bit higher level of expectation, put on him, then suddenly, okay, things started to improve and in terms of his performance. And that's part of what we're talking about.
Yeah, you think of like the mythology of being like a samurai, it's the same kind of thing. I've done another thing that I've done a lot of is sort of the defensive driving stuff for the military, where you're teaching them surveillance detection stuff and an actual, like, how to get away in a car chase and all of that stuff. And so I've dealt with like a lot of like SEAL team type guys, Army Ranger guys. These guys are the same guys we're talking about here.
Yeah,
they're exactly
same mentality.
the same, and they have the same difficulty having, you talk about PTSD and those guys coming back from combat and trying to settle in. And I heard this staggering statistic about these guys, and it was like super sad, but more of them die when they come back doing high risk activities like riding sport bikes and just doing crazy stuff, right? Than die in combat, because they're just like jonesing for it.
So they need that adrenaline dump.
Yeah, they miss the action. And so you see this, the publicized side of it is the super sad, suicide rate that these guys have, but they're also just out like doing stuff. Like they're like bungee jump, like anything they can conjure up to kind of give them that hit, that dopamine hit, right?
Fix.
But
they need that fix.
Yeah, they want the fix, and it's no different like trying to retire as a race car driver. Oh my God, like what am I going to do in my life that's going to feel like driving that race car? That 1,000 horsepower Pikes Peak car is just, it's the best thing ever.
Like, well, not only to that point, Paul, you talk about, retiring, what are you going to do after you retire? But it's like just trying to, as a driver and living at that highly competitive level for so many years, regardless of what level of success that you've achieved, it's like trying to have that conversation with yourself and be real with yourself is a whole nother realm of holy shit. What are we talking about here? You know?
Yeah.
Well, something like Michael Jordan. I mean, look at him. I mean, he retired. He had 3 championships under his belt with the Bulls, and he retires. Then I got to come back. Now we saw him do baseball, and he's involved with his sport stuff and his NASCAR stuff. He's got all this other stuff that's going on, and it goes back to exactly what you were saying, Paul. That's clearly a man who doesn't know how to stop, even after his illustrious NBA career. There's so many other facets to him, and that, like you said, and I've got friends who were in the military as well, and that they do stuff where I'm just like, why are you doing that? It's something
it's like, and it by the way, it is 1/100,000th of what it was like. I know guys that were in combat, and they talk about this stuff afterwards that they're trying to do to fill that void, and they're like,
it's nothing.
It's not even close. I mean, it's not even close. So it is like I said, it's a funny thing, but it's weird because almost in a way, it's like I said, it's sort of a cautionary tale. Like, it's okay to say that people, but what I tried to say in the book is like, don't try and say this is natural talent that makes these guys good at this. It is their willingness to live this close to insanity, to push themselves so hard. It's okay to admit that you're not willing to do that. I say that, in Optimum Drive, I'm like, any rational person wouldn't do this.
You're right. You did say that in the book. And actually, just in case you're interested, John, here it is.
I was going to say, I need to buy this book.
Yes. It's right here.
It's just a journey, right? It's a journey.
I'm going to probably read it in like a day because I'm a sponge for that kind of stuff. So
most people, I have someone recently that said they've read it 7 times so far. Almost everyone has read it multiple times. It's a flattering, maybe I'm just a bad writer. I don't know what it is. I'm kind of like, it's kind of 50-50 for me. Like, but I wrote, I that's the first book I've ever written. I am going to write another one. It's going to be really different though. But you can tell I've kind of like, I talk a lot. And
good for our
right.
Yeah, but it was like I wrote it like I talk.
Podcast gold. It's podcast gold, Paul.
It's like you need to read it like that. It's almost like the audiobook is the way to go, except for I don't read the audiobook, and so it has a lot of these little tiny mistakes in it because the guy didn't understand they were mistakes at the time, because he couldn't put things in context the way I could, if I did it. But anyway, it is one of those things, but it's just, I don't know. That's what I'm saying. It's this weird thing. I'm at this point now where I'm almost to the point where I'm just like, don't do it, but more realistically, where I'm actually at the point where realize what you're getting yourself into.
Well, right. And that is the beauty of hindsight and maturity, not necessarily age, but maturity. Because like you said, when you went through the Winfield thing, you were just arrogant and realistically probably too immature to be able to handle what was dealt you.
Way too immature.
And as we've gone through and we've lived these experiences and we've lived these disappointments, and we know the level of dedication that it takes to achieve at a high level, as we're talking in motorsports, it is one of those deals where it's like, it would be easy to say, no, don't do it. But, at the same time, to your point, Paul, it's like, just realize, this is not going to be easy if you want to achieve any real sustainable level of success. And you're going to have to give up a lot, and you're going to have to sacrifice a lot, and you're going to have to put things, kind of kick the can down the road on some certain aspects of your life if this is really what you want. So make sure you go in with your eyes wide the fuck open.
Yeah. And that's what Optimum Drive was. I mean, that's what the book is. It's describing all of the things you're going to have to do. Like, it removes every excuse in the driver pantheon, and that was a major undertaking because God, we're good at making excuses,
Well, hell
about
yes.
our performance and all that stuff. And so it's just like, nope, here's what you have to do. Here's where the focus needs to be. I mean, I was just in my coaching, I was, they were like, I got to learn the car like an engineer to be a good race car driver. I'm like, no, you need to subjectively be able to describe the car in great detail, what it is doing at any given point in any corner on the racetrack. That is your job. Your job is not to tell them to adjust anti-roll bars and shocks and springs. and corner weights and all of those things. Your job is to describe how the car drives. It is their job to change the car and understand what to change in the car to get you to a good handling car that you can drive, the ultimate compromise for you that day on that track. And so it's like that's what Optimum Drive is. It's like I got in trouble with some vehicle dynamicists, some very well-known ones, and they're going, I wanted KPIs in there, key performance indicators. That's what engineers use to describe drivers. They use key performance indicators. They look at things, they summarize things in data, and they look at where you need to be at certain points around the track, and then they tell you percentages you're off of these KPIs. Now, as I'm describing this, you're like, this sounds really weird. And you know what? It makes all the sense in the world to an engineer to talk like this, but it makes no sense in the world to talk to a driver like this. And they want drivers to be like, they want them to be engineers, but it's like, that's not the world. Drivers are feel animals, because in the car, you have to be able to drive by feel, by seat of the pants. When we get out of the car, we can be as analytical as our brains allow it, and our brains allow different levels of that. But in the car, we simply feel it. And we also have to feel it all subconsciously, because it is too much data simultaneously to be able to consciously think of. We can only think of one thing at a time. So it's like this big disconnect, between the engineering world and the driver world. And all of that is what in the book, I was like, this is your reality. This is how you need to think. And then you need to be able to have an engineer that can understand you're going, hey, yeah, in turn 3, which is a third gear corner, just after turn in, right after I've released the brake, I'm feeling this bit of understeer start to creep up. So I'm having to drag the brake in there longer than I like. And that's affecting my ability to point the car. And I'm having to get on the gas a little later than I want. Completely subjective. Not like, I feel like, like if I had a little more support from the shocks there, and he's like, don't you talk to me about whether that support needs to come from the shocks, from how I'm corner weighting the car, or whether I'm setting my anti-roll bars, or do I need to change spring or preload? There's another half a dozen things they can do. Don't tell me what I need to do to the car. Tell me how it feels. And then I'll decide subjectively and then objectively what we're going to do to this race car. So that's the stuff I talk about a lot.
And you're right, and that's one of the biggest things that I love about that book, because you think about that ability to communicate with your engineer, your crew chief, whomever, because at the end of the day, and that's the beauty, part of the beauty of this book, Paul, is that it doesn't live in this hyper technical engineer data driven language, right? Like your KPIs and all these other things. It's because every driver, and this, Paul, has their own style, right? And they have their own level of communication, but it's that human feel, it's that seat of the pants, and being able to communicate that to your crew chief, to your engineer, and let them figure out what it is that needs to be changed. And you did a really good job in the book of kind of telling people that without necessarily, slapping them around, but saying, hey, you don't have any excuses. If you look at it this way and you can do this, then you're going to be better, not only as a driver, but as a person as well. And that's one of the great bridges, I think, of your book, is that you bring that human element and not live in that highly technical world that so many driving theory books do about, radius and,
yes,
all that kind of stuff. But, to that point, and that's where the beauty of those relationships and the chemistry within the team really are good. Like, in my PWC run, my crew chief and I, we were on the same wavelength, man. We continued to improve every weekend. It's beautiful. Absolutely right. And on the flip side of that, I remember years ago when I was a young guy in the mid 80s, trying to, really looking to do Formula Atlantic. And I went to Road America because that was my home racetrack. And I walked up to Claude Bourbonnais in the paddock, and
he's one of my dear friends. I love Claude Bourbonnais.
Claude was the man, right? Yeah. He was blindingly fast, did a few Indy 500s, blindingly fast in an Atlantic car.
Was Jacques Villeneuve back in the day, in the players of the Atlantic days. Wiped the floor.
So I remember, I will never forget this to this day. I walked up to him in the middle of the woods in Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin, when they were working on his car. And I said, so Claude, can I talk to you for a minute? And he was nice enough to indulge me. And I said, so at the end of a session, I said, what do you tell the engineers? What do you tell them about what needs to be changed on the car? Or what do you, he goes, oh, I don't say anything. I just drive the car. And my jaw just hit the floor thinking, how do you not say anything to your engineers about how to go even faster beyond your natural talent, or to maximize your natural talent? And it just was a real eye opener to me that he basically was like, I just drive the car. I don't really tell him anything. And I'm like, wow, how does that even happen?
Well,
but some guys are like that.
If the relationship is that good, the guy can just see. I mean, it can even be completely unspoken with just shrugs and, it, like in a quick little debrief. And when the engineer, like you're describing in your Pirelli World Challenge stuff, when the engineer knows what you can do, and when I say that, like they know what your operational window is, like they know what you can fix, because there's no such thing as a perfect car, right? There's no such thing as perfection in any of this. And as I say, the car will only probably actually kind of drive itself well balanced through half the corners on the course. And the rest of it is your operational window to put the car in a well balanced state through the other corners. And that's where I said, that's where you were in your money. If the car was good in all the corners, they could put a monkey in the car and they could get lap time out of it. But that's never been the case ever. The car has always needed something. Maybe that FW13 with the active suspension that Mansell won his championship with, because that car was so active that potentially I bet you could get it closed, but it would still never be perfect. There would still be things to do in every corner.
There's always going to be a compromise
that aren't just the routine that you're going to have to make up for. You're going to have to rebalance to carry that little bit of extra speed, because the car would pick up a little push or be a little loose at those little moments where it isn't quite perfect, So it doesn't matter how fine you slice the pie. Eventually you get to a point where you say, I got to get to work here and make this car better. I got to balance it in the moment out on the track in this one turn, because it is less than perfect, and therefore I am hemorrhaging 1/100th of a mile an hour here. And yes, folks, that matters. It all matters. It all adds up into measurable distance. That 1/100th of a mile an hour is measurable in thousandths of a second at the end of that lap. And that wins and loses races, and so your job is never done, even in the quote unquote closest to perfect a car has ever been. And that relationship is an understanding of your understanding of their ability to put the car in a window that you can handle when you drive it, and vice versa.
Well, and it's not,
and that's a relationship there.
And it's not, and that relationship is not unlike what you had said early on in the show here, Paul, about, when somebody stands on the side of the stage and they can sing, but they don't want to go out and perform, and the person winds up pushing them out, and they push them out on the stage, not because they're trying to be a jerk about it, but because they feel like they can actually do it. And that's part of, what we're talking about here with this current relationship with car and driver and engineer. So
yeah, it's cool. It's cool stuff. And I think what I've tried to do, and what I've tried to do recently, and everything I've done, is sort of remove the veil of kind of what the pundits would say, the armchair quarterbacks would say about our sport and peak performance. Even the stuff I saw with Simone Biles in the Summer Games, and just recently with Michaela Schifrin, who I'm a huge fan of. She's from Vail. Not very far from here, and maybe the best alpine skier of all time. She certainly has the record that proves that. And everyone's starting, oh, she's kind of fallen apart like Simone Biles. And then I'm looking at Michaela's social media posts, and she's in an amazing frame of mind, even though she's blown her two biggest events by skiing off course. She's tough mentally, man. I mean, she's like, has no issue with it. But the pundits, the media, not to, definitely not taking this in a political direction, but just, you get these armchair quarterback versions of everything. And so you don't understand what it's like to be an Olympic caliber, top caliber athlete. And these guys are mentally tough. It's just like an Army Ranger. They cannot crumple when the plan goes sideways and they're behind enemy lines. That is not an option. And they make sure that every single person in that unit has this amazing, it's like, good movies like that, like are the, 13 Hours or Black Hawk Down is a really good one for that.
Yeah.
SEAL Team 6, any of those where you see these guys, these operators, and when they're, when the going gets tough, man, they have this mental fortitude. And a normal person just like who panics when they see a spider.
Yeah.
That's the state of sorry, John. But
I hate
that's
spiders, man.
That's how bad. And I will give you hell for that your entire life that I know you, because it's frankly ridiculous.
John, read the damn book. Get over it.
Because here's my point to that. 10 minutes of research on the internet, you realize that all you have to worry about are brown recluses and black widows in this country, and they're easily identifiable. So killing spiders is a very cruel thing, and to be scared of them is a silly thing. It has no grounding in anything that has any level of rationality to it. It was bad enough when there was it used to be a thing when, people were scared of mice, with a mouse. But now this whole spider thing has taken over a whole level of ridiculousness with people. But it's like, that's how detached we are from our potential, that we can be scared by a spider. Honestly, like, I could think of no better example. But it's like when you have people like that trying to relate to an Olympic athlete, then you end up with a lot of I would say almost mythology that describes these people. And that's what I'm trying to do here with all of this, is just to say they're just human beings. One foot in front of the other, put their pants on one leg at a time, make mistakes all day, every day, just like the rest of us, make bad decisions, make good decisions. But what they have is sort of a rational clarity of their potential, because they don't lie to themselves. They can't afford it. They
just going to say that. Yep.
Yeah.
And you outline that in your book. It's like these guys that are they can be real with themselves, and they will hold themselves accountable and not bullshit themselves.
And that's where I say you're flirting with mental health issues, because that's the beauty of being scared of the spider, John, is that you're in such a comfy space because you're nowhere near your limits.
Yeah. Well, it kind of goes to, you mentioned Simone Biles before, and I had a lot of friends who were like, oh my God, she's a disgrace, blah, 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 blah. And I wasn't comfortable with any of that. And I just made the statement of, you know what, guys, I don't think any of us have had the entire world watching us as we're trying to do the thing that we're supposed to be the best at and then have an issue. I don't know what that kind of pressure is like. And none of us, most people don't.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly. Now, the thing about that is I will point out, and I'm kind of opening myself up for some criticism here, but I'm okay with it. The Simone and Michaela thing is really different. Like, Simone did kind of crumble under the pressure.
She did.
And she pulled out of the events. And everyone, sort of the pundits on the couch, saw this Michaela thing as the same. But meanwhile, I'm seeing Michaela going, I can't wait for my next event.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is mental toughness right there.
It was a very different thing. Like, it was a very different thing. It looked on the outside very similar, but actually it was really different. And Michaela, I think, is today in this. And you know what? If she flies off in the Super G, she doesn't care. She's like, she looks at it like I was giving my all. And that's a normal thing in alpine skiing. And it just happens to be the one alpine ski event every 4 years that regular people watch. Everyone else that follows World Cup skiing, which is a tiny bit of the Olympic audience, knows Michaela is a total badass, and why she has the winningest record of any alpine skier in history. And in alpine skiing, you're pushing so damn hard. By the way, I love saying this because it's the coolest statistic ever. How many G's do they pull?
Right? I don't even know. Do you?
I don't know.
Over 3 G's.
Really?
Jesus.
Sustained. Wow. This is not a spike number. You know this. You know this well, Kevin. Like, we're like, how many G's that car pull? And you're like, yeah, 2.8. And it was a spike and a dip and a compression.
Yep.
This is sustained on a flat corner with your legs holding you up. They're doing over 3 G's.
That's incredible. I never knew that statistic at all. That's
insane. That's why these guys are crazy, because you got to realize what, like, your foot is protected, your ankle is protected by your boot, but the rest of all of that force is going through your knee, your hip, and your back, right? And so those guys, they're tree trunks, those guys and gals, man. They are so tough.
Yeah.
To sustain 3 Gs through, like, in the, in the slalom, they're doing these quick hits where they're doing quick hits of that. But when they're getting up into GS, Super G, and downhill, it's violent chatter. You want to talk about spike loads, Kevin? Imagine in the downhill at 80 miles an hour at a 3G sustained, and having the ski chattering while it's doing that. The forces that are going through your body are, it's crazy. It's like no other sport in the world does that to you, because there's nowhere you can sustain that sort of G. So
you're right.
It's really cool. So those guys are tough. Like they have physical injury through their entire careers, and so do gymnasts. My daughter was a competitive gymnast, and they are getting hurt all the time. Like she did a couple of trips to the hospital, and she was sidelined many times with sprains and bruises, and that's just normal in gymnastics. And it's alpine skiing is this violent version of gymnastics, So
it's a good way to put that.
It's really hard. It's really hard to get back to my point. Like, it's hard to understand what these people are really going through in their lives to get to that level, whether it's a race car driver at the professional level or an Olympic athlete. It is a life. It is a life like being like dedicated to being a monk, where you're like, I'm not going to interact with people. I'm not going to marry. I'm not going to do anything. I'm dedicated to this one thing in my life, and that is my life. And that's what it's going to take to be the top of anything. But within all of that, like, it's not just like I'm that or I'm not. It's not a black or white thing. It's just taking bits of that and going, I'm not going to make excuses about my performance. I'm going to be rational about why I'm not performing. And if you're honest with yourself about that, you still can make progress with the compromises of what you've chosen to take on in your life. I want to have a family. I want to do this. Just like I did. I've got a family. I didn't dedicate my life to motorsports in a way like I could say, like I should have. It's okay, but don't make excuses. That's the bottom line. It's like, be rational, figure out root causes, build a really good foundation, which means you've got to tear down what you think down to the core, start building it up rationally, and take it as far as your life will let it. And just realize that within you, doing that very methodically, there's more performance and potential within you than you ever dreamed. And along the way, John, you won't be scared of spiders.
I don't freak out too bad. I just say I don't like it. I leave the little black ones alone because they eat the other little bugs that are around.
And I would say, minus the spider part, that is a good synopsis of your book, Paul. That is well said. Well said.
Thank you.
Now, as we've cranked through here, actually a couple of hours now, we really haven't yet talked about the time as the Stig. So
I've been avoiding it.
I'm kind of glad we haven't, because I find the other side of your career way more interesting than, I stood in a Simpson suit for however long at a production side, and then I drove a car.
Alpenstar.
Sorry,
Simpson
I am
helmet.
sorry. That's what I'm talking about, the Simpson helmet. But either way, you're at because I imagine with the television side of things, it's just a completely different animal than a legitimate race. Because it's just, okay, here's this very fast car, get to learn it, take it on this track, balls out as fast as you can.
Wait, did you say get to learn it? No, you don't get to learn it. You just have to perform off the cuff.
Right. Well, then I'm glad I'm corrected.
Hop in and go.
Then in that case, then it's even more kind of insane, because at least with a race car, you have that time to learn.
Way crazy.
In this case, you're getting in some whatever exotic car, and they say, okay, go run the balls off of it now and let us know how fast it is.
Yeah, it's like that's like the track stuff is super easy. Other than you're very limited in laps, but you very quickly rationalize that and go, I could go faster, but I drive all the cars the same number of laps, so it's relative one to the other. And then along the way, the skill I took out of that was that I can, and I use it to this day because I also am a current presenter in a very, very big YouTube channel called The Fast Lane Car. It has over 1 million subscribers. It's I think in the top 5 of all YouTube car review sites, and I do all their track reviews for them. And I can get a lap time in a car on my second flying lap. And I'm very happy with that lap time. I do 1 lap with a cameraman in the car, and in that lap, I learn what to do with the car. So I overdrive the hell out of that lap because that's what they want, and then I dial it back and I do a clean lap. And I've done that for years now with them, and I'm happy with those laps. I go look at them on video. I'm like, I could get a couple tenths out of it, you know?
Right.
But there may be like a small little error somewhere at one of the corners. Everything else, I'm like, nah, that was okay. And that I learned from Top Gear, because of 8 years of just getting chucked into a car with no practice and setting lap times. And then again, that was the easy bit. The hard part was when they would give me a car out in the world somewhere on a public road and want me to perform at that level with it, probably a little styly slidey, because that's what they wanted.
Sure.
With a camera crew on the outside, with a curb on the inside, the outside, curbs everywhere, walls.
Fit that you could hit.
Yeah.
You're more of a stunt driver at that point than an actual race car driver.
You know how much a camera costs that they use? Do you know how much those cameras are?
They're in the thousands.
The lenses are in the tens of thousands, and the camera bodies are generally 10 to 15,000, an RE or a red. But the lenses can be $30,000. Right. The tripod's $5,000.
Yeah.
You know, that's if they do a lock-off shot, which is what is called when they set focus and they leave it and they walk away from it. So the only thing for me to hit would be the camera. Okay. So I would slide in and out of frame, for example, right?
Yeah.
So that was a very high. Okay. Now here's the funny part about all of that, the lack of communication. I didn't talk to the crew.
Of course.
So was it just sort of playing the Stig?
They described it to me over the radio while I was sitting in the car ready to go. Here's what we want you to do. Sometimes it was over a hill. I didn't know what was on the other side other than what they told me was on the other side.
That's bizarre.
Oh, Jesus.
Oh my gosh.
The reason it was done like that is not because they didn't understand it. It's because there wasn't time for me to practice. They moved that fast.
Wow.
And so generally it was, I was hiding somewhere in a trailer, literally hiding from Jalopnik that was trying to find out who I was.
Yeah.
So I was always being careful of, I would drive into a site already wearing the suit because I had put it on because it had been dropped off for me like a drug deal in a park nearby. And I would drive my minivan into the park. I would get into the back of the minivan, grab the bag, get all changed with checking, making sure there was no one else around me. I'd get it behind the driver's seat, drive the car into the location, whether it was a track or someplace out in the middle of nowhere or in a city. I would drive the car into the location. I would step out of the car as the Stig with the visor down in front of the crew. I would wear that suit with the visor down the entire shoot. Ooh. I would get back in the minivan, drive back to the park, get out of everything, put it in the bag, leave it in the park, do a pin drop for them, let them know that I'm gone. They had to wait 10 minutes, so I was gone. And they would go in and pick up the bag, which is why I don't have a helmet and why I don't have the gear or any of it as a souvenir, because they took it back every single time.
It's like some weird CIA operation with this whole
Absolutely.
Stig thing.
I was in hotels under an assumed name. I was in rental cars under assumed names, right? Everything. No one knew where I was gone. Only my wife knew. The president of the BBC, Tanner, knew. He was the only person on the crew that knew. And the person that wrote my checks at the BBC, the head of the accounting department. They're the only, and my boss at
and your boss, yeah. That's crazy.
Do you have any cool assumed names that you were registered under? Like, you know,
They did have one for me.
Magnus Askilds or something.
I got to remember what it is. It was a guy named Ryan Center who was the first producer. Awesome guy. He had a funny name for me, and it was a goofy name. Like anyone at the front desk could be like, "That's not a real name." I can't remember what it was. It was like Gamble Putty or something.
Oh, it was just so outlandish. You're like,
yeah, it was. I think it was Gamble Putty. It was like Johann Gamble Putty.
Now, when you were doing that, being that, of course, Tanner Faust, of course, is obviously a very popular driver himself. How much interaction did you and him have over doing these car?
He would come over at lunch and we would chat. He'd be the only person I would talk to the whole day. So just backstory, like we've been like best friends for 20 some years. So I knew Tanner from the winter driving school in Steamboat Springs, and Tanner grew up in Denver. Not all of his life, but part of his life. He grew up in Denver. His dad still lives in Denver. He's a doctor.
Yeah.
And so Tanner used to go to the winter driving school. I used to go there and guest instruct, like when they had like VIP stuff and all of that. I wasn't a regular instructor there. I would just go up just certain times. I'm about to head up there again, for the John Hennessy thing coming up, hopefully. And so that's but I met him there and then had him come out. I was running the BMW Ultimate Driving Experience with the biggest ride and drive. We had 6 simultaneous courses that we ran in parking lots, and we'd have 80 people every 2 hours. It was a really big ride and drive, and it still runs to this day. It started in 1999, which is amazing. Like it still runs. And so that's Tanner. That's where I met Tanner. I met a lot of people on that program because we had 30 instructors, and the good ones I kept, and the first 6 Formula D championships were won by guys that came out of my schools that I did there, that I wrote the curriculums for with E39 M5s. We did car control clinics. Samuel Hubinet, Rich Rutherford. Reese Millen was a friend. He was not in that group, but he also was winning those championships, but he was part of that group. And those are the guys that do all the driving and all the Fast and the Furious movies and, all the Bourne movies and all that stuff. It all came out of all of that. It's absolutely amazing where I look and I see where all these guys have gone. It's really cool.
So how did the Stig thing happen?
The Stig thing was from Tanner. Okay. He called me. So it was a Good Old Boy Network phone call. And Tanner said, "We're casting for the Stig. You should come in and try out." And and the thing was, like, I hadn't heard about it. There were most of the people, I think everyone else was from LA. I live in Colorado. I used Tanner's street address on my application.
Wow.
San Juan Capistrano, right down the street from Reese. And I basically, got a tryout, but I think I got a worse tryout than anyone because Tanner, like, I've told this story a lot of times because it's a funny story. But so what it was like, they didn't tell you anything. You just had this like 1 hour slot to show up at El Toro Marine Base.
I've done stuff at El Toro before.
Yeah, so it was at Irvine, and yeah, I think everyone, because AMCI was based there at the time. They were there for decades, for a long time. And so I had a 1 hour slot. I showed up there. I'm greeted by Tanner. I'm like, "Hey, familiar face. This is great. Hey, how's it going, buddy?" He's like, "All right, I got to treat you the same as everybody. You get 1 lap around this course with me driving you, and you're riding as a passenger. And then you're going to do 1 lap in a Mustang, and you're going to do one lap in an Aston Martin." That was the tryout. So He chucks me in a Mazda 3, and I don't know again whether, and I've given him hell about this, and he's never really given me a straight answer. He just laughs when I tell him, like, because he gave me this like 11/10 crazy Tanner lap. The guy can wheel a car, as all of us know. He's amazing.
Yep.
And the thing was this is a huge course at El Toro that I'm not exaggerating when I say there was a gate maybe every 100 yards. 2 cones every 100 yards. They were spread way apart.
Way out, yeah.
And it's linking all these taxiways and runways together.
Yeah.
And he's driving like a man possessed, as Tanner do.
As he does, yeah.
And it's a Mazda 3, a Mazda Speed 3. I was really impressed with the car, actually.
Those are fun. No, they're a fun car. They're underrated.
Because he had the thing slapped sideways at every corner entry and then just kind of stood on the gas and drove it through. It was a really impressive lap. And I was sort of like, and he was laughing at me and talking about stuff the whole time. We're sort of catching up. And I'm trying to learn this track, right? And the gate spacing is crazy. And so I come, and the lap's over like before I know it, as the car ABSs to a stop, you know, and he pulls the car off and he goes, there's the Mustang. It's already pulled up on the start line. And I jump in the Mustang. I'm genuinely like just shaking because I was just like, I have no freaking idea right now, like where I'm going, like no idea. And so I see the first gate and it like, they're just like counting me down, you know, and they're like, we got another guy coming in, you know, because it's all one guy at a time. Like I didn't see the guy in front of me. He was already gone. I didn't see the guy after me. So probably we have really 45 minutes in the middle to be realistic that this all occurs in. And so I take off in the Mustang and I'm driving through the one gate. Like I'm looking for the second gate.
Right.
And when I say I'm looking, like, I don't really have an idea where it is.
It's just out there somewhere.
I'm just hoping it's not behind me, you know,
Yeah.
and I'm just I'm just scanning, you know, I'm like, where is it? And I'm also like, I'm really wary because they're all so far apart of completely missing the second gate and seeing the third one. I'm like really scared of doing that because that would be really easy because they're so far down there, downrange, literally downrange, that I could miss one, you know? So I'm driving the lap like that. And I do get a little lost as it comes back in on itself because it did actually come back through a gate. You can imagine how like confusing that is. Like
it's like a terrible autocross course.
And so I get through it and I come back and I'm just like, I've blown it. Like I have to have blown it. And there's the Aston Martin. So I hop in there. It's a manual Vantage. I've never driven one. And it was actually like this is going to sound terrible, like a really good Mustang.
I was gonna say that. I was gonna say that.
But it just sounds a lot better. And
the
shifter
looks better.
A lot better.
Were either of them prepared in any sort of way?
I'm a big smell guy, and my god, like the smell was worth the price of admission in the Aston Martin.
Were either one of them prepared in any way, or were they just stock off the lot cars?
No, that's something you should know about Top Gear. They don't prepare anything. Even those $200 cars are driven as they are until they break, and then they start bodging them together.
Wow.
So they don't do anything to any cars. Like they're driven as is always. No brake fluid, no brake pads, no nothing. Like they're as is. So they want to expose that when they're bad, and I support that 100%. Right.
Well, I was thinking because you were auditioning, it was a little bit of a different situation. But okay.
They probably never changed the tires.
Those tires were shot by the time this day is done.
Now he was just at McLaren. I could text him and go, "Did you ever change the tires?" He would tell me no. Yeah. You know, so and I wasn't the first guy and I wasn't the last guy. I was just like,
I was gonna say, so however many guys went before you could have, quite frankly, burned the car to the ground by the time you
had
got
no
in
clutch in the car by the end.
The last guy has no chance.
The clutch would literally have to slip to the point that the car wouldn't move, and at that point they would go and have it replaced. They would have the manufacturer come pick it up and replace it. They wouldn't touch it themselves. They carried a lot of power and a lot of weight, and that just wasn't the way they operated.
That makes me very happy. I'm glad they did it that way.
Yeah, and so then the Aston Martin lap comes up, right? And I'm just like, I'll tell you, like, if I have something in me that's good, and this was on the truck jump as well, is if the few defining moments or at the beginning of a race is when things are really bad, I can really focus. And so the first lap was a disaster. And the second lap, I just went, come on, dude, like my little internal dialogue, like this is it. You got to nail this. And I did a really clean lap in the Aston Martin. Like I couldn't remember it right now. Like I couldn't tell you what it was, but I could tell you when I pulled up and stopped, I went, that was a lap.
You just knew it. Yeah.
I don't know how, I didn't know how great it was, but I knew like out of the laps that I could pull out of a hat, right? That was a representative lap of what I can do right there. And I just got out of the car and I go, how was that one? And by the way, the first lap, I was like, how was that? And Tanner was like, it's fine. It's fine. And I got out, how was that one? He's like, it's fine. It was fine. And so I had no feedback, nothing, right? No, like, I'm like, hey buddy, come on, you know,
well, he gave you the warning.
I'm at.
He
like,
told you, I'm not going to treat you
that.
different. You're right.
Nothing, right?
Yeah. Give me a little intel.
Left. So I left. That was that. That was the end of it. So I thought I was driving from the school in Sonoma to Monterey to Laguna Seca to give hot laps in an Evo 10, which was actually turned out to be a super fun day for a press thing that they did at Laguna Seca every year. And halfway there, I'm driving down PCH because I decided to go the scenic way, which is really beautiful south of San Francisco, between San Francisco and Monterey on the coast highway, instead of going through Gilroy the normal way, like 101.
Right. Stopping at the garlic farm.
Yeah. I was on the coast highway, all the beaches and stuff. And I just get this random phone call. It's like a month later. It's the director of Top Gear. And he goes, hey. And I'm like, hello? He's like, this is such and such from Top Gear. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, what are you doing right now? And I'm like, I'm driving down PCH in an Evo 10. It's a beautiful day. I'm like, what are you doing? He says, nothing that good. And he goes, pull over. Got a spot to pull over? I'm like, yeah, there's a beach like every quarter mile with a little, you know, gravel parking lot there.
Yeah, a little cutout kind of thing.
There's just everywhere there. And so boom, I had pulled over within like 10 seconds. He goes, so like a month ago, you did a tryout. And I was like, oh yeah. I mean, it's like he had to remind me. I was like, yeah. And he goes, how'd you like to be the Stig? And I go, okay. I'm still just like, because he's sort of messing with me the whole way through. So I'm kind of giving these, like, you're kind of messing with me answers, you know?
Right. And kind of cryptic.
Yeah. And he goes, I go, okay. I'm like, sure, I'll do it. And I'm like, was I your first choice? He goes, yeah, you're my first phone call. I'm like, that's really cool. And I'm like, can I ask you why? And he goes, Tanner really recommended you. I'm like, okay, that's cool. You know, bonus points for having my buddy. Yeah. He goes, in the Mustang, he goes, you were basically same lap time. He goes, everyone was kind of the same lap time, within a few tenths of each other. Some guys were super slow. And I go, so everyone kind of got a little lost, like I did, right? So you like did the best lap you could, but you got a little lost because that was what my Mustang lap was. And he goes, in the Aston Martin? I go, yeah. He goes, you were 2 seconds faster than anybody.
Wow.
So that's awesome. So here's what I concluded from that, and I confirmed it later with Tanner. I was literally the only person that didn't also get lost a little bit. I'm the only guy that did a clean lap, because the guys that tried out we would all be within tenths of each other, and we would be like splitting hairs over who they liked the most, or who had the Tanner would be going, I like the guy's driving style and look good on camera. You know what I mean? It would come down to that, like just a choice like that. But I just got lucky in the Aston Martin, and I put together a clean lap, and I just didn't get lost. Like I knew where the next gate was, and I made nice arcs. You know what I mean, Kevin? I made pretty arcs through those big gates.
Absolutely.
If you make good arcs, you go fast. And so that's how I got the gig. And so it was funny. I told them like a few weeks later, like, because I had to fill out paperwork at that point.
Like NDAs, you mean?
Colorado. I thought you said you lived in San Juan Capistrano.
Oh, jeez.
No, I live in Colorado, and they didn't care. They were cool, and they actually paid for the flights and all of that the whole way through. And I was great friends with all of them the whole time. And then, no joke, like at that point, that's when I went completely under the radar, and it became like I worked for the CIA.
Black Ops
went super top secret.
A lot of my friends actually thought it was Tanner.
I told everyone
who was doing. Yeah, that's what a lot of people were thinking.
Yeah, it was a natural thing to think, right? That it was Tanner. Yeah. That made all the sense in the world. So I perpetuated that myth as much as I could, and told everyone. And yeah, there were episodes where I was standing there next to Tanner, but they, that's not a problem because they do use stand-ins. Like there were stand-ins that were used for like publicity stuff that I never went to. What was funny, like I went to the premiere of the show at Las Vegas at SEMA, and I was just in the audience while they came up on the stage. But I was there randomly because I was at SEMA. I wasn't invited there by the show.
Right.
I was standing in the audience of the initial show, just as a dude. Because I just wanted to see what was going on. So I just walked around. I could walk around, right? I could always walk around.
Sure.
Because no one knew who I was. Just as long as you didn't see me come out of my trailer in street clothes, I was stuck in the trailer all day when we were doing that stuff. I was with David Hasselhoff. He did the NBC pilot, and this is not a secret. He had substance issues.
Yeah.
Right before he was doing all of his driving, he did.
Yep, I had heard that. A
lot of cocaine in our adjoining trailers. I could hear him through the wall. Our bathrooms abutted, so our back walls of our trailer. It was a Star trailer. It had two, like one on the one side and one on the other. I was on one side, he was on the other. Whoever we brought in for the Star and the reasonably priced car got the other side, and I was permanently in the one side. Okay. And so I heard him go in the bathroom, snort, cough, blah, blah, blah after that. And then I met with him in his trailer, like with my visor just cracked, talking. And then I came out, told everyone, I'm like, I think he just did cocaine. And they're like, well, you can't prove that because you weren't there. And meanwhile, the whole time he's with us, he's like,
why is he talking 1,000 miles an hour?
And he's going 1,000,000 miles an hour. Yeah. Here's the crazy thing. I went out and drove him around for so long that he came down. And we're out at El Toro, so there's nothing to hit.
Right.
So we drove around for like 45 minutes. They're like, is he ready yet? I'm like, nope. And
Jesus.
Then, damned if he didn't put in a good lap. It didn't get beat for a long time.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's some crazy shit, man. So did you ever hear who some of the other guys that tried out for it when you tried out for it? Do you ever hear who
I know a few of them. There were 2 or 3 IndyCar guys. There were a ton of sports car racer guys.
Come on. Specifics? Any names that we would know?
I won't name names. I'd let them do it.
Paul.
Yeah. Me. No, but it's all guys. Anybody that was racing in IMSA or Pirelli World Challenge back then. I don't know if it was SRO then. Literally anyone that lives in LA was there. Okay. Plus the entire stunt and precision driving community.
Gotcha.
That was who was there. So
right.
And probably a few that lied about it like I did and flew in from somewhere.
Yeah.
Probably true.
So it was over 50 guys. Over 50.
So wow, 50 guys. I didn't think it'd be that
Those
many,
poor cars.
They did it for
Jesus.
Like 2 weeks. They did tryouts for like 2 weeks.
Oh,
Jesus.
Wow.
I was surprised. I mean, I'm just as shocked as anyone that I got it. And like I said, it was this. That's why I kind of brought this up. It was this. It's this. I'll tell you, like I've never felt it stronger than. Well, Pikes Peak is another place I do that same little Zen moment. I do it every year at Pikes Peak. Pikes Peak, the start line is insane. You're going one at a time. You're in line. You're trying to not let the tires cool down too much. You're trying to put a little heat in the brakes, pulling up to the start line. You get one run every year to do this thing. It is, but the Hot Wheels truck jump was the same sort of crazy pressure. They're winching you up backwards up 100-foot, 60-degree pitch.
Yeah, like this gigantic Hot Wheels track.
Oh my God. And the truck broke every time we jumped it. And it shot off in some random direction. It was a 4G hit on the takeoff ramp. And the car, it misfired down the run and we had no level off speed. So if the misfire was bad, you were just going too slow and taking off at full throttle. And it was a 275-foot gap. And you were 55 feet in the air going 107 miles an hour.
God.
And every time you got winched up, I was just thinking, I've got kids, I've got a wife.
Right.
Stupidest thing.
Why am I doing this?
I've ever signed up for. And by the way, and I did it every time I had to do it. I probably did 40 jumps. Tanner did 41 jumps because he did the one at Indy. But every time I did it, I thought about how stupid it was. And every time I did it, I marveled at how cool Tanner was. It did not faze him. He was sitting there on his phone sending texts right up to the moment they sent him. I'm not kidding.
I believe it.
It didn't
I believe
faze him at all. And I like, he's one of my best friends. And you know how you hate like giving your best friend some sort of like really deep, meaningful compliment?
Yes. Yes, I do.
It's all, you've always just got to be giving each other crap the entire time you know each other.
Yes.
I told him, I was like, I tried to like, I'm going to try and be serious with you right now. But dude, your mental strength is astonishing, because I was right there doing it with you. And I consider myself to be pretty strong mentally. And you're in a different league. And he's the best guy I've ever coached. Like I help him, you know, whenever I can, whenever he goes and drives something new. You know, we think alike. We talk about driving in the same terms. We've known each other for so long. I have the same kind of relationship I have with him, I have with Nico. And so he's a good go-to guy for like a deep car conversation. I can talk to him about really weird minutia that I say to other really accomplished drivers, and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And the guy's won like 10 championships. But those guys I can talk to. And so I told Tanner, I was just like, it's just amazing. And so when I coached him, like, he's the only guy I've ever coached. Kevin, you'll appreciate this to no end, where I could give him an individual particular thing to work on, looking at data afterwards, and it wouldn't mess him up to do it. All I would see in the data afterwards is that little thing varying in the data. It didn't mess up anything else.
Right. He could focus on that one aspect.
So there's no compromise in his style at all.
Crazy. Any normal human being, literally anyone, and I've coached thousands of people, you know, and hundreds for like a long time, right? Like where I've coached them like for a year. Tanner is the only person I've ever seen where I would see him only manipulating the thing, and his steering and his braking and his acceleration traces everywhere else looked exactly the same. It's like, it's weird, like almost robotic weird.
He had that innate ability to hone in and focus on that one piece that needed to be worked on.
I can't do it. I cannot do it. I will be thinking about that thing, trying to do it, and it will mess up what I'm currently doing. So when the moment comes to do that thing, I'll do that thing right, but everything else looks messed up. Everything else is compromised as a result. So it's something unique and really special. And so when I see all the things Tanner's done, I can't fault that guy. He deserves it all, because he's really good.
I just was watching him yesterday with that McLaren reveal yesterday with the E-Series truck that he's driving. Oh, were you?
Yeah.
So when I'm curious, just because of, you know, how you said your close friends, you're used to giving them crap all the time, right? So to try to give them this deeply personal, heartfelt compliment. So you give Tanner this compliment. So did he take it graciously, or did he just give you some smart ass crappy comeback like we all tend to do?
No, he gave me the smart ass comeback, of course.
Of course. Yeah, that's kind of what I was expecting.
But we then at that moment on, we talked about it. I mean, it's pretty, like, he lives in LA, and he has just the coolest setup there, as he should. And so I call that like my West Coast crash pad. So I'll go there just randomly and stay a couple days at his house if I've got something going on in LA, and we have the freaking best conversations, and it can be about anything. Like, he's teaching me how to sail. Like, he's a very accomplished sailor, because his dad in Denver, you know, he was racing Hobie Cats, and I happen to have a Hobie Cat, and I just picked it up a few years ago, and I'm horrible at it, you know. And so we'll have these great conversations about sailing, and I'll talk to him about sailing to no end. And he kind of dabbles in photography, and I'm huge into photography. So we talk about photography a lot, and then we talk a ton but we talk about the film business and things we like in movies and we don't. So he's just one of those guys that I can sit and talk to for forever, and it's always good. Like, I'm always like so happy and feel privileged to have had the conversation in the first place.
Well, is he just one of those kind of guys that he's kind of a prodigy where no matter what he focuses on, it could be from driving to making food. Once he focuses on that, he just dominates.
Yeah, he's super smart. And I think he, as far as like, he has a biochem degree. So, he's got a biology degree, and I think it might even be an advanced degree. So it might even be a master's or what have you. So when he was doing that stuff, like when he was in college, I remember the guy's first name, but he kind of had this guy, his name was Bill, super wealthy guy that lived in Tampa or St. Pete. Bill was an engineer that came up with like the sky swing, all those crazy carnival kind of things they have where it pulls you back in the bungee and then it lets you go.
Oh yeah, you see the videos of people like fainting on it all the time and that kind of thing.
Tanner was the test dummy for all of that.
Why am I not surprised? I'm not surprised. That just makes sense now more than anything.
And Bill was like this crazy pilot. He did all this weird stuff, and Tanner was Bill's muse. Like Tanner was the guy. He is analytical and smart, a kid, right? Bill at the time was maybe 50-ish or older. And he had this kid that could see it, could see Bill's genius in engineering and design and, building these crazy amusement park things one after the other. So all of those whippy things and the bungee things, those are all come from Bill. And Tanner was the guy that rode them all for the first time. And the only reason Tanner would ride them was he was smart enough to know they would work. From an engineering perspective.
He could look at it
crazy enough and had the presence of mind enough to will himself into the thing, and give good feedback to Bill. That engineer driver relationship we're talking about.
Sir.
Yeah. So I haven't told a lot of people, and I don't know that Tanner tells a lot of people. I'll probably get an angry text. No, he won't care. But that was his. Tanner like always had that mindset. When I was talking about like the way I thought as a kid, like he thought as a kid like that too, but he also created some really cool opportunities for himself by being with the right people in these environments. So yeah, I met him at winter driving school as a driver, but simultaneously he was hanging out with Bill and they were doing all. I remember Bill had 2 of those blue hyacinth macaws that are like super rare, those ones that are endangered, but that was back when they weren't. But I remember that because I just think it's like the most beautiful bird, just like a random thing about Bill. But Bill like had cool airplanes, cool cars, was an engineer for all these crazy rides and stuff. That's how he made his money or some of it. And Tanner was kind of in lockstep with him as a really young guy.
That's awesome. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's cool really interesting. Yeah. All right. So as we kind of start rounding the corner here, since we've had you for about 2.5 hours now, a couple things you're thinking of. We're going like a green-white checkered here with all your time on Top Gear as the Stig. I'm sure there was more than one situation that did not go according to plan, that turned out to be a veritable shit show, whether the car broke down, crew, whatever it was. Anything go completely off the rails in any of the stuff that you did as the Stig on Top Gear?
Well, I'll say that it was set up to be kind of organized chaos. They liked things to go wrong and be filming them, whether it was your run-ins with the police on public roads or crashes or flat out like I look at Richard Hammond and realize that I worked on the UK show and I also do Grand Tour and I've done Top Gear UK not that long ago, and I got to meet Sabine Schmitz there.
Oh wow!
Just amazing person, and so I was just heartbroken at her what happened to her.
Yeah.
But like that whole show is genius. It's like the most non-BBC thing you could ever imagine, because the BBC, my dad is a huge fan of the BBC, and the BBC is this state-owned entity, right? So everything is just crazy, like crazy off the rails, sort of controlled. And yeah, I'll throw the word liberal in there. What the hell, because it is.
There we go.
It is what it is, man.
It is, and it used to be this bastion of sort of neutrality, but it's changed a lot, and they hated Top Gear. Like they hated it. Now here's the thing: Top Gear was a cash cow, an absolute cash cow for them. It was the only thing that really made them money, and it made them a lot of money, and they hated that too. Because they were funded by the state. It was taxpayer, it was like the British version of NPR, or PBS, but it was paid directly out of taxes, right? It's a government program. And so they hated Jeremy Clarkson. I mean,
they still hate Jeremy Clarkson
because of his power and because he didn't toe the corporate line, right?
All right.
They were looking for a way to get rid of him. They found a way to get rid of him, and he was happy that they got rid of him. And he has thrived since they have got rid of him.
Oh, yeah.
And they're in a much better place, Jeremy, James, and Richard.
Oh, at Amazon, yeah.
And the guy that he punched, he should have punched. I know the guy. The guy didn't deserve to be on that crew. He was a producer's son, and he stuck out like a sore thumb because that crew is the biggest bunch of rock stars. It's the TV equivalent of SEAL Team 6. I mean,
right.
They were all top guys. They're the best of the best. Of the guys that shot Blue Planet.
Right.
They're the best cameramen the best cameramen that exist. They're the best producers, the best directors, everything. Like they could afford to have the best of the best there, right? And they did. And that's why, like, for me, they were like, you get in that car and you're going to do this stupid thing over this blind crest, and you're going to do it in one take. And I was like, sir, yes, sir. And all I did was click the radio in response. Like, I heard that. I just clicked it. You know how you do that, right?
Yep.
You didn't even say, Roger.
Yeah.
Well, okay.
Mm-hmm.
It was just click. And I heard an action over the radio, and I lit the tires up and I went. That's the way it went. Like I said, it made me a better person. I had to operate at the level. And so when Jeremy punched this guy, I had just worked with Osin Timon, who's the guy that he punched, in British Columbia. And I was like, who is this guy? And they're like, oh, he's a producer's son. We have to have him here. And I was just like, okay, great. And he was just a nuisance the entire time. And the next episode was the one in the UK. And I had a feeling, like, if he's going to hit anyone on that set, it's going to be the one guy that isn't a rock star. And sure enough, as soon as I found out, I did send out a text when it happened. Who was it? And there was the name. And I was just like, yep. That made all the sense in the world. So that whole show, whether it was the UK show, the US show, or Grand Tour, operated at an incredibly high level. And they were always pushing things to the very limit and hoping that something would go wrong so they could film it. And they were setting you up for disaster, right? And they don't want it to be what's happened to Richard twice. That's the flaw in this. Is that Richard has been, he was almost killed.
He was almost dead. Yeah.
He was almost killed in the jet car.
Yeah.
Certainly his knee is messed up permanently. I was with him right after that happened. Also, strangely, in British Columbia, but 2 different episodes. One was Top Gear, one was Grand Tour, years apart. But I was with him right after kind of both of those. And during the other thing was the Jeremy fracas. But anyway, they don't want that to happen. They don't want anyone to get hurt, right? So they draw the line there, and they are actually careful as far as health and safety and all of that. They're a bit careful, but the way they run things, it is run in a way that things can go wrong, and they film it, and that's part of the show. And I've said this before, most of the really, really cool stuff that I've done on that show never aired. They air the stuff in the middle. We do radical stuff on that show. Always. There's always a slow, medium, and fast. They almost always use the medium. It's too crazy what's going on, and they don't use it. It doesn't fit in the story. because it's a little too nutty and they're trying to tell a story. And so there's stuff on the cutting room floor at Top Gear that would blow your mind.
That's amazing.
Blow your mind.
I was telling Kevin
to that end,
yesterday,
I only ever bent one wheel. To answer your initial question, Kevin, I bent a wheel.
Wow.
I have broken cars on purpose. Like I jumped the Hellcat, and I told him if I came up, I found the jump on the site we were on, and I said, "Do you want a shot of a Hellcat jumping?" And they go, "What will it look like?" I'm like, "It's a loading dock. It's going to look amazing, but it's going to break the chassis if I jump it high enough because the landing isn't good." And they looked over at the guys from Dodge that were there, and there was an identical red Hellcat sitting there. And the director looks at the guy and goes, "It's okay if we break this car, right?" Like a leading question. And the guy from Dodge, who's a friend of mine, Eric Heischel, who's one of the head guys for SRT, he looked at him and he goes, "No problem."
Wow.
So he just lined up and did the jump and broke the chassis.
Send it.
Yeah.
Nice.
But it's like, so I mean, that's what it's like there, and it's that's like the best example. And then like I've been like in a really sketchy situation in the snow, like sliding a truck on a cliff, right, with logging chains on it, and we've got them cranked down with extra straps so we can drive fast with chains, and a helicopter comes ripping in to get a shot and totally whites me out with the rotor wash as I'm sliding around a turn on a cliff. And I'm going on a right-hand corner, and if I slide wide, I'm off the cliff. And I get whited out. I'm probably only going like 40 miles an hour or 35 miles an hour in the snow, but it doesn't matter.
Right, when you're blind.
Right? So I just like try and stick the car extra right and just try not to go off the cliff. And so it's like moments of sheer absolute terror like that. And no joke, I tell him like, "Dude, don't do that again." And you know what I hear back on the radio? Go ahead, laughter. Yeah.
They're all about that controlled chaos. They love it.
Yeah. And they tell me after, they like kind of put their arm around me afterwards when I see him again. We're down at the lodge, and I'm like, dude, I almost. He goes, "But you didn't."
Right. Exactly.
That's the very British way to look at it, though. It's like, well, yeah, almost doesn't count, though.
Yeah, I do love those guys. I mean, it was the most frightening, coolest thing I've ever done in my life. The truck jump was the same way, just sheer stupidity. But it's a privilege to have done it. If I had known what these things were going to be like to do them, I would have had second thoughts. Like I said, you think about your children, you think about your wife, you think about that stuff. But it's cool stuff. I mean, no doubt about it. But yeah, holy cow, trying to kill me every day.
Holy cow is right.
Yeah.
Interestingly, you talk about, drifting that truck in the snow and being on the edge of a cliff. That's not all that dissimilar from doing Pikes Peak in a 1,000 horsepower vehicle. How many years you been doing Pikes Peak?
This will be my 6th time in a row. And then I did it one time with Tanner way back in 2002. Yeah, that's so much more controlled. Like I said, I have that moment at the start line, but there's a lot riding on it. All of those things are true, but that's just driving, and just driving that's in my wheelhouse. So, and that's just that, to be honest, it's pure joy for me to wheel that car up. I say it's a real privilege, and I love it. Like the moment I get to the top, if we make it to the top, if the car didn't break, all I want to do is drive it down and drive it up again. I can't believe I don't get to do it again till next year, because it is a feeling I can't match, and I want. But it's just driving, and so that to me is not like Top Gear. Top Gear is just this out of my comfort zone, doing something kind of crazy with a car. This is just
for show.
The limit. Yeah.
Top Gear's all about the show. So
what?
Go ahead, John.
I was gonna say, what are you gonna be driving for the next experience up the Pikes Peak?
The NV8 hypercar, which is in Vegas now, and it is a 1,000 horsepower high downforce prototype. And it's when it runs well, it's 5G's braking and 4G's cornering, and it's incredible, absolutely incredible.
Holy smokes! So now, is that considered I'm not that familiar with all the different classes that run at Pikes Peak, but would that car that you're driving be considered the top class?
Yes, it's in unlimited.
Yeah. Okay.
It's in unlimited, and we're basically just going for the overall record. That's all we're doing.
Gotcha. And don't they allow, like, isn't there like a practice day or something like that prior to the actual
There
runs?
are 3 days, but they're broken into thirds. The mountain is broken into thirds. So you only get
so you can only do a segment.
You only get a full run on the race day unless you rent the mountain outright before the race. And you can, for X amount of dollars, you can run it between 5 and 8 a.m. like 2 weeks before. So we're going to try and run that this year. It'll be the first.
How much does it cost to rent
say that's exactly my question.
It's a lot.
That's all he's going to say.
And you try and split it up between 2 or 3 teams to sort of spread the costs out.
Wow.
Yeah, it makes sense. All right. Well, man, we've been at this for a while, and I think we could continue going on for a while. But I know I've sucked up a good bit of your time. But John or Paul, anything that we have not yet discussed that we need to before we let Paul go back to smoking his food here out on his deck?
I just have just me being the car nerd that I am, and all the vehicles you've driven and all this sort of thing. As far as civilian cars go, what do you enjoy driving? What's your favorites?
I like the hypercar stuff. I would say like peak car for me would be like a Carrera GT or a Zonda F with a manual transmission. Something along those lines is kind of like peak car for me. They got into the paddle shifts and stuff, and electric power steering. I don't care how well you do any of that stuff. It's, the cars that were made up to about 2005 or so are about the best ones that were ever made. So you can give me like a high horsepower, decent downforce, mid-engined always, because I love the visibility out of a mid-engine car. I did love that AMG GTR driving that thing at COTA. That was pretty fun.
Yeah, that was a good car.
Those things rip. It's a good car out of a front engine rear drive car. Those are pretty damn fun. So anything that's well balanced and has enough horsepower to light the tires, that's going to be good fun.
Rock on. So, Paul, anything that we've forgotten to talk about with you today?
I think I rambled around and through and took enough tangents that I don't know. I feel like the cup is kind of full, but yeah.
All right, fair enough. Well, Paul, we're going to have to get an update from you on this whole Pikes Peak deal in your next book. But that said, for those of you that missed part of the show, Paul is not just the Stig, but he's an accomplished author. He's written Optimum Drive about the roadmap to driving greatness, but it's not just about driving greatness. It's about personal growth as well. So I encourage you guys to go check that out.
Thank you.
I'm going to order my copy today. I swear I am. Promise.
Well, there it is, folks. We've spent a good couple hours here. Thank you very much, my good friend of the show, Paul Gerard, for taking the time out of his Saturday, looking out at the snow, smoking his dinner to chat with us here about his experiences with the book and as the Stig and his racing background and all the way from England and Europe back here to the States. So, Paul, my sincere thank you, my friend.
Yes,
We're
thank you.
Honored to have you on today, and we look forward to talking to you again soon, brother.
Thanks. A pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Kevin. Great to see you again and talk to you again. And John, wonderful to meet you, and best of luck with everything. And to both of you, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Anytime, and we'd love to have you back. And by that point, my shoulder surgery will be in full bionic mode.
Perfect. I was going to ask you.
Yep, it's doing well. Well. So, Paul, if I don't speak with you directly before then, I will see you in Laguna Seca in about a month's time.
I look forward to it.
All right, brother. Thanks again, man. It was great having you on. Great hearing the stories. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
You got it. All right. See you, Paul.